We do have quorum, and I'm going to call the meeting to order. So I would like to advise those in the public gallery that they are welcome to use mobile devices as long as they are in airplane mode and that all devices are muted. It's not permitted to take photographs or record any part of the meeting. Please note that this meeting is being recorded but not streamed, as there are no evidence sessions. Agenda item 1 is apologies. We do have an apology from Daniel McCrossan, MLA. Are you aware of any other apologies, members or clerk? And I'm not aware that anybody's attending via Zoom. Yes, sorry? Tom Buchanan, apology? Or
He's at PAC as well.
Okay, on the PAC one, okay. Thank you. And I know that traffic is bad today with the weather, so we are expecting another couple of members shortly. Okay, declarations of interest. I would remind you of your responsibility to declare any interests of any of the items under discussion today. Does any member have any interest to declare in relation to any of today's business?
Executive owner of a small farm.
Okay, William? Any declarations of interest?
I declare an interest in a partner in a farm business.
Brilliant. Appreciate it. Thank you. Agenda item 3, chairperson's business. So there was a meeting with the UFU re the vote of no confidence on Monday, and thank you, Declan, the deputy chair.
Pardon?
Do you need in, William?
It's just I was just looking at last meeting's minute that there's no apologies. I did send an apology through Michelle.
Okay, right. Okay, we'll adjust. We'll gather that and we'll make sure it's included in we'll include that in the change in the minutes. Okay. Thank you, William. Okay. Meeting on Monday with UFU referenced their vote of no confidence in the department. So thanks to Declan. We met with William Irvine and Alexander Kinnear from the Ulster Farmers Union. Their meeting was requested at very short notice following the union's vote of no confidence in the department last week. A note was forwarded to all committee members, but again, as I've said, it was very short notice. Declan and I met the UFU, and given there was no opportunity to discuss the meeting with the committee, with colleagues in advance, we made it very clear that we were not in a position to represent any collective view of the committee, but we were in listening mode. A note of the meeting was taken by the clerk and will be circulated shortly. The concerns raised by the union will not come as any great surprise to members, including, as I did, a perceived lack of action on TB, concerns regarding the rollout of future support, but it appears to them, above all else, that the farming community is being painted as the sole villain in the ongoing issue relating to phosphorus and unwanted nutrients in the waterways. I will note that the union was pleased by the ministerial response to the British Government's inheritance tax changes and the ongoing high-level quarterly meetings with the union. There were pains to point those out as well. Item number 2, members. I also had the great honour.
Chair, could I just ask, was there a minute of that meeting taken?
There's going to be the clerk was there, and as I said, there's going to be circulated shortly. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I had the great honour recently of speaking at the 2025 Farming Life Awards on Thursday, the 30th of October, to some 250 people. It was a great event at the Crown Plaza. And it was great to spend time with people who have devoted their entire lives, I suppose, some of them young, some of them older, to farming and producing food and agri. So there was a great swathe of everyone there, probably like our event next week, where we had people from the woodlands and tree planting, from RSPB, from the environmental sector, and a lot from the farming and agri. And it was good to see them in the same room enjoying the evening, and it was just really good to see that cross-generational gathering. Item number 3, members, I refer you to page 3 of the table papers to a statement of the Minister made in the Chamber on Tuesday regarding the independent review of environmental governance in Northern Ireland, and I was grateful for advance notice of the statement, and we will consider the review shortly in matters arising. Number 4, members will be aware of the latest news regarding avian flu, and the committee will expect to be kept fully informed, particularly as the inward migration season is upon us. Mandatory housing measures for all kept birds and poultry came into force from 1 minute past midnight this morning, and follows on from avian influenza prevention zone that came into force on the 1st of November. So obviously, with Christmas looming, I would imagine those turkey farmers in particular and chunky chicken farmers will be significantly at risk and concerned here at the moment. Are there any other comments on this, Michelle?
Just in relation to that, I think there may be some confusion around compensation, and I suppose given the timing of all this and the closeness to Christmas as well, I suppose it will be looking about whether or not there's just more than just compensation, but maybe there's some sort of additional support. So it'd be helpful if the committee could maybe explore that with the department. And given this is perhaps their main business for the year, and the pressures that will then place on particular farms.
For some people, Christmas is their main event. and their entire business structure could be centred around that, so that compensation piece is acutely important. Is that enough for you there?
Yes, Chair,
Clark?
so we're inquiring not just about the compensation, but whether the compensation is weighted, or if you like, or reflective of the time
Well, I
of
think
year
that,
that
yeah,
this is happening.
absolutely, because they're very much dependent. This is their business.
Yeah.
Okay, members, happy enough. Okay, the last item of Chair's business is in relation to AFBI. There have been a number of pieces of news where AFBI has just come into the purview of concern, if you like. So obviously there was one in terms of the data breach, but there's also one where some of us have been aware of some of the practices at AFBI and some concerns that have been raised or potentially at AFBI. So I know the Minister was made aware, I made the Minister aware, and I know some other members have questions in regard to that. So obviously some of that's very live, so we have to be very careful of what we say, but significant concerns have been raised. So I have a response to a query that I raised. I got the response on Tuesday of this week, which I've shared with the clerk this morning. It just was too late for me to include in the papers for today because I didn't think that was fair given the weight of stuff that we have on, but certainly is something that we would require confidence in and answers to. And Michelle, I know you had some questions in.
Chair, thank you. Yeah, I put some questions in on a priority question in on Monday with regards to inspections and so on at AFBI Hillsborough. But I've been made aware, and as I know you have, and perhaps others too, sort of video footage and photographs as well. And I think it might be helpful if maybe photographs maybe were shared with the department and maybe got some feedback from them as to what action is being taken in regard to this, because obviously it's very concerning. And I am a great advocate of AFBI, and it does worry me whenever I see what I have seen. But obviously at this stage, I would like some feedback and assurances, I suppose, both from AFBI and from the department.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that many months since we were at AFBI with a very successful visit, and I mean, it was excellent. I mean, I have to put that on the record. It was excellent. Obviously, some of the photographs and video footage that some of us have seen certainly need responded to, and we would need assurance around it. John?
Yeah, well, the two things that have arisen, of course, are the data breach and also the arising and current issue of the health and welfare of animals with human-related impact in pig farms. We can't shy away from either, and we need to be officially briefed as far as is possible on both. I thought we had already agreed to seek an update on the data breach. I raised this one day and I want to check if we'd had a response or whether we're still waiting for that, but we did as a committee agree to do that, and it should be fairly soon because it would be more than 2 weeks right, that we requested that meeting.
No problem. Yes, you can come in there, Claire. I've
Can I just come in there, Chair, just to say that we have communicated with the department around the data breach, and they've undertaken to give us a briefing when their investigation work is completed. So they have that engagement is in place, and just vis-a-vis the whistleblower as well, if I may, Chair, just to say that if you don't mind, I'll take a little bit of advice around sharing of materials and so on. I'm just very conscious that legislation and concerns around whistleblowing, confidentiality, and the rest of it is very much an issue that requires caution. So if you're happy enough with that, I'll take some advice.
I would be keen to get that. That's one of the reasons sort of held back in terms of sharing the footage, if you like, and that type of thing, just to ensure that the process is absolutely followed and it's fair to everyone. But there are significant concerns that have been raised, and your point's well made in terms of the data breach, because there's other traction in regard to that issue too that we're probably all receiving as members in regard to what that relates to and so on. So if members are content, then we will await the response on the data breach specifically on that, and then we'll take the legal advice in terms of sharing any further information with the department on terms of the whistleblowing.
Chair, it may not need to be legal advice, right, but just process advice.
Yes, but in relation to this, obviously, I think that this will probably be in the public domain, I would imagine, fairly quickly.
Yeah.
So I don't think that we should be seen to be wanting either, because obviously there will then be a criticism of this committee if we're in receipt of information from a whistleblower and we haven't then dealt with it appropriately.
Well, so to be fair, we have a response there, and the department did, through AFBI, respond fairly quickly on the initial query. So I got the response on Tuesday. It was too late to put in the table papers, but it's been shared with the clerk, so that will be with you. That's part of it. And you're right. It's our duty to respond at haste, but also to be mindful of the fact that there's a whistleblower involved, and the process does need to be followed. Members content? Yep. Yeah.
Chair, are you content that response you've shared with me is shared with members immediately? We can probably do that. We can probably do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Okay, members, thank you. Happy, William?
Yeah, it is concerning. There are issues that we're aware of, and we looked to AFI for an example, and it is concerning that there seems to be issues.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Okay, members. Agenda item 4 is the minutes of the 23rd of October. So notwithstanding the issue that was raised by William in terms of the recording of an apology, which we will amend on the papers, if you're content, I will sign them with that minor addition, and then they will be published on the website. Thank you, members. Agenda item 5 is matters arising. So, members, I refer to page 17 of the pack to correspondence from the Minister, dated the 21st of October, regarding the recent publication of the Environmental Governance Report. A copy of the report starts at page 19 of the pack and makes a number of recommendations, and they include the DAERA to publish a map of environmental governance, identifying who is responsible for what, and signposting to the key points of contact to enhance accountability. All public authorities in Northern Ireland to have a duty to cooperate with the environmental regulator to reflect their environmental responsibilities and to facilitate the exchange of information. The regulator to make greater use of existing civil sanctions and to adopt a new civil sanctions for other environmental areas to broaden the toolkit available to support compliance and enforcement. Members were content at our last meeting for the committee team to create the opportunity to discuss the report in more detail after recess, and the Minister has now made his statement in the House, which I welcomed. Attention now turns to the creation of an action plan, and we will of course want to keep fully informed of developments. Do members seek any further information at this time, or should we seek a briefing in the new year on the development of the action plan? Content with that? Yeah. Thank you, members. Item number 2 referred to pages 120 to 121 of the pack. Correspondence from the Department dated the 24th of October in reply to our letter dated the 17th of October regarding the Farm Sustainability Standard Regulations. I'll summarise this response now, but later in the meeting we will consider the regulations along with the briefing, so I don't propose to rehearse all the arguments at this point, because you will have members from the Department there, you can question them. The Department advised that the provisions in respect of authorised persons are those which are already in place as set out in Regulation 5 of the Common Agriculture Policy Direct Payments and Support Schemes Cross Compliance Regulations, Northern Ireland 2014. The Department states an equality and human rights screen was carried out in respect of this on the 17th of October 2014 and was found to have no adverse impact on equality of opportunity and good relations, disability duties or human rights issues. An equality and disability duty screening carried out in relation to the Farm Sustainability Standard Regulations on the 9th of August 2024 found no effect on human rights, as the policy is concerned with rules on the environment, animal and human health and animal welfare, which farmers must comply with to receive agricultural support payments. Members of the Department states it follows Equality Commission guidelines which set out when a full screening should be carried out, and as no negative impact was identified for either of these policy changes, full screening was not required. The committee has written separately to the Department seeking additional information regarding EQII screening for those SRs, or SRs in particular, and in summary, the powers permit an authorised person to access a computer or other records relevant to the inspection. However, the Department do not carry out any enforcement action if access is denied, but instead will withhold all payments due to that business in that scheme year. If you're content, we will return to this SR later on in the meeting, and some of those matters may be pulled about again if you're content. Yep, thank you, members. I refer you to page 123 to correspondence from the Department dated 24th of October regarding environmental protection wet wipe containing plastic regulations. We were briefed on the SL1 on the 19th of November 2024, and executive approval was received on the 30th of April. The Department advises there would be no change to the policy intent since the SL1 was provided to the committee, and plans to delay the statutory rule via negative procedure in November 2025 to align the coming into force date with England and Scotland of June 2027. Have you any comments? You content to consider the SR when it's been led? Thank you, members. Item number 4, refer you to page 130 of the pack. To a memo from the Clerk on the Committee for Infrastructure dated the 23rd of October advising that it seeks our views on the Water Sustainable Drainage and Flood Management Bill by the 13th of November. You will recall that we considered this matter at our meeting on the 23rd of October and agreed to consider the matter further at the next meeting to agree a response. Staff also provide some additional material to members via email on Monday of this week. Members, a copy of the bill is introduced. Explanatory memorandum and the bill paper produced by Ray starts at page 131 of your pack. If members will bear with me, I'll provide the context for the committee. Clause 2 of the bill introduces a statutory enabling power for the Department for Infrastructure to promote the use of sustainable drainage systems, probably will become known as SUDs, as the preferred method for managing surface water in new developments. So those SUDs are a suite of water management practices designed to replicate natural drainage processes in developed areas. Their primary function is to manage surface water runoff by controlling flow rates, improving water quality and enhancing biodiversity and amenity. Clause 2 will not make SUDs mandatory, but it does create the framework that could lead to their mandatory use in the future. Following discussion on the 23rd of October, on Monday the team distributed a raised paper and other supporting material by email to members to assist in our consideration. One thing that does strike me is that retrofitting SUDs isn't clearly addressed in the bill, which might be more useful if and when possible for addressing some existing flood risk, given how much destructive flooding appears to take place in long-established streets and neighbourhoods. Do members have any responses, or are you content with a return raising the issues of potential retrofitting? Members content?
Content, Chair. If we could add to that, how the Department would envisage dealing with any pressures that already exist that can't be dealt with through SUDs. I said actually in a question in the Chamber the other day, SUDs alone will not deal with the position we're in now, and I related that question to investment. However, I think in this instance we could relate that issue to what you raised there, to the retrofitting, and if that can't happen or isn't envisaged that it will happen, then how they intend to deal with the existing quite very significant pressures.
I agree with you in that terms, John. The other issue that just comes to me is the piece where, and you rightly point out that in some instances, SUDs wouldn't be the solution that would work. But for me, I'm wondering if it is the solution that would work, why it wouldn't be mandatory, why it would be optional, and it'll come down to cost. And but that's only short-term cost because that's the build cost and so on. So the lifetime costs when you do have an instance of flooding, in terms of that sort of fiscal projection and stuff. So if there's a piece in there about maybe just a discussion in around mandatory where it would fit, where it would be the preferred option, maybe just to establish. I know we can debate that anyway in the Chamber, but we've been asked for comments and stuff. So I think if we're going to give comments, it would be wrong for us not to raise those queries. Members, anything else in regard to this?
Well, then I would, if I can go back to you, I would still be keen to try and determine what impact on the existing pressures it is envisaged that this will have.
Yep.
I just summarise the response there, please, members. That so we'll send the back to the committee team saying that we are the three issues that concern this committee relate to the potential for retrofitting, how the department might respond or would respond. Does the legislation deal with pressures that cannot be dealt with by SUDs alone, that may need additional resourcing or practices to deal with floods? And thirdly, is there a clear reasoning why this is not mandatory from the outset?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep. Members content? Yep, thank you. Yeah, that's great. Okay, item number 5, you'll recall the committee recently asked NI councillors for information relating to odour issues and how they deal with them. We also wrote to Shared Environmental Services seeking their input. To date, we have received 7 responses from councillors and a response from SES, which is in the packet, page 153, is that right? Yep, 193. The SES response states that it was created in 2015 to support councils to meet their environmental responsibilities by undertaking habitat regulation assessments on planning applications and local development plans on behalf of all local councils. However, the regulations do not extend to the protection of public health and therefore has no role or remit in odour assessment and provides no advice in this regard. Members, given the deadline for responses from local councils was the 31st of October, I recommend the committee ask the team to follow up one more time and that we then consider, so there's 4 councils were written responses from? Yeah. 4, so if we just go back to those councils, try and get that response so that we have a full response, I suggest we return to it on the 20th of November. Members content?
Yep.
Thank you. And members also content to note the response from SES?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Item number 6, refer to pages 1962, 16 to the response from the Department dated 21st of October to queries we raised regarding the Dilapidation Bill. Have you any comments at this stage, members? If not, the response as written evidence, we'll hold that response, as written evidence for the later consideration. Okay, thank you, members. I refer to page 228 to 229 of the Dilapidation Public Opinion Informal Survey. The informal survey was created to complement the Citizen Space call for evidence. It would not be part of that call, but rather a separate opportunity for others to make some high-level comments regarding the bill for information. The committee received 30 responses, which include all councils, to the now closed call for evidence, and 9 additional written submissions and from stakeholders. If members are content, I would suggest that the additional free text question is added to the end of the survey before it is issued, and that question is there a single improvement you would suggest to strengthen the bill and improve its effectiveness for both council enforcement and the local community? Seems like a pretty good question. Members content? We'll add that to it then, thank you. Any additional comments? Anything else you'd like to see in that? And are you content that the Assembly Engagement Team issued the survey as drafted with the additional question added? Thank you, members. Okay, matters rising 8 and 9. I refer you to the table of papers starting at page 14, the written briefing from the Department dated 3rd of October and correspondence from the Department regarding the recent occurrence of Asian hornets. This would, under normal circumstances, be under its own agenda item. However, the update arrived after the pack was issued on Monday. I would thank the Department for what is effectively a detailed running commentary of the situation. Members, as we are aware, the Asian hornet is listed as a species of union concern under EU Regulation 1143/2014 under Annex 2 of the Windsor Framework and pose a significant threat to honeybees, native invertebrates and crops. Asian hornets are stowaways that move with imported goods and on transport, although their exact means of arrival here may never be established with certainty. The Asian hornet captured on the 10th of October was the first confirmed occurrence for Northern Ireland, leading to the discovery of currently the most northerly nest in the UK and in Ireland. NIA had already obtained specialist Asian hornet response equipment, leading to the successful removal of a nest on the 18th of October. However, overwintering queens can reproduce, indicating potential for establishment here. The monitoring and trapping programme in the Dundonald area is continuing, and no live hornets were noted by the 28th of October. The operation will soon be wound down for the winter, with follow-up monitoring in the Dundonald area in spring 2026. NIEA is working in collaboration with the Irish National Parks and Wildlife Service and the National Biodiversity Data Centre in Waterford through the Shared Island Biosecurity and Invasive Species Initiative. DAERA's Asian hornet contingency plan is being reviewed, but reducing the risk of further Asian hornet entry is unlikely, and focus will be on response, early interception, preventing establishment and shifting to long-term management if needed. In relation to our query regarding projected costings, the Department states they have not yet been developed. However, specialised response equipment totalling £4,539, including hornet suits and an electronic tracker, was procured prior to the Dundonald incident. Measures to enhance the public awareness include weekly Asian hornet reports to the NIEA Invasive Species Team, enhanced media coverage for spring 2026, awareness training for relevant government officials, and a regular engagement with the Ulster Beekeepers Association. In addition to the DAERA Asian Hornet Watch app, the public can also submit reports to the Centre for Environmental Data Recording, which hosts an invasive species reporting tool. Members, we know the dangers that invasive species can affect. You just have to look at Loch Ness for one of those. So, members, it looks like the Department are going to return to this in the spring, but it is going to remain to be a significant issue. So, have any members any other comments to make on that? And we will return to it in the spring, I'm sure. So we'll put that on our forward work plan, if that's okay, just to return to it in early spring, just to make sure we'll do our piece to ensure that the Department are on the ball with that. Agenda item 6, Dilapidation Bill, oral evidence session, and that is from the Institute of Historic Building Conservation, IHBC. So I'm going to refer members to a pack starting at page 231 for the written submissions. For reference, I also refer you to the bill and explanatory and financial memorandum as introduced starting at page 233 and the raised research papers starting at page 273. Members, I now welcome the following representatives from the Institute of Historic Building Conservation to the meeting and invite them to provide their evidence to the committee and answer any questions. We have Dr. Joanne Curran, NI Chair, and Mr. Dawson Stelfox. So we'll take, if you're happy after your presentation, if you're happy to take some questions maybe, if members have some further questions for you. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank Thank you for inviting us here to give a consultation on this. My name is Joanne Curran, and I'm the current chair of the Institute of Historic Buildings Conservation. Just to explain what that is, we are a professional body for conservation practitioners, so that's traditional skills people, architects, engineers, conservation officers, etc. And we exist to establish and develop the highest standards of conservation and support heritage-led regeneration. So we're a network of regional offices, of which Northern Ireland is one, and we have links to the Republic of Ireland, and we host training and events and give advice on conservation. I'm here with myself as chair and Dawson Stelfox as a member of Historic Institute of Building Conservation.
Morning members, and thanks for inviting us here. I'm going to briefly run through our views and opinions on the Dilapidations Bill, and then more than happy to enter into discussion or take questions from you on that. My background is I'm a conservation architect. I was also involved a bit with the submission made by the Royal Society of Ulster Architects, although that covered slightly broader issues than we're talking about today. But I think the two submissions are aligned and in common in that we welcome the general thrust of this legislation, and I suppose that's born out of long experience of seeing in particular the sort of medium-sized towns of rural Northern Ireland losing their sense of identity and heritage over the years, partly for all sorts of economic reasons. But what we found, and remember, years ago I remember working on the Dromore Townscape Heritage Initiative, and that was a scheme where there was quite generous grant aid through the Heritage Lottery Fund to building owners. In some cases up to 50, 60, 70% grant aid to do work to refurbish buildings, run by a local community group, very strong local community group, who were very keen to try and get more empty shop units and things reused in their town centre. And what they found at that point was there were buildings which are unused, derelict buildings, but the landowners wouldn't accept the grants on that because they were effectively holding on to see if they would at some stage get demolition or allowed to be rebuilt, or in some cases even turn them into car parks. And this is centre of Dromore, a designated conservation area. So even with significant grant aid as a carrot, there wasn't enough of a stick to come in and say it's not acceptable to leave these buildings lying derelict in our town centres. So I suppose where we see the gap here that the Dilapidations Bill will fill is we've already got the dangerous structures bit under building control. So if something's going to fall down for public safety, there is already legislation there that can deal with that. But for the general decay and disuse of the buildings, there's no measure of stick at the moment to go in and try and put pressure on landowners to either do the buildings themselves or to put them in the market and sell them to somebody who will do them. I think in the thrust of our paper we're saying though the stick is important, but also some carrots are important as well to encourage people to rejuvenate these buildings, and those carrots could be through grant aid, but potentially more useful through the rating system to give encouragement for people to invest in their buildings and put them back into use again. So the bill is welcomed, but I think there are measures which could reinforce the effectiveness of it. Is there more incentive for, in particular, if you think of the small buildings, in the town centre, we're not talking about very large buildings here. So having welcomed the bill in general, our paper does outline some concerns we have, and they're, I suppose, the nature of things that tend to be quite maybe pedantic concerns, or they could be down to the meanings of one word or something, but you'll be used to that as members of the committee in terms of what happens. And the risk in this is that the measures in this bill are used to bypass the normal safeguards of heritage which are enshrined in the planning laws. So in conservation areas of townscape character, and obviously with listed buildings and monuments, there's a presumption against demolition in those. the risk in the dilapidations bill is that demolition becomes an easy option to remove the dilapidation. And there is a particular mindset in some people that tidiness is more important than heritage, if you like. So you remove an eyesore by demolishing it rather than restoring it. And then you get a nice flat site and you can put a car park on it or put a new building on it. Now there are plenty of safeguards in planning legislation against that. That's been strengthened over the years. The right to demolition is now not in areas of townscape character, areas of village character, as well as conservation areas and with listed buildings and monuments. But there is a bit of a risk, in particular, the focus of our concern is clause 17 and what's in that. There's a bit of a risk that there's not sufficient safeguards in the bill as it stands at the moment, which we think could lead to demolition. And we've outlined in our paper, three particular issues in that. And if you want, Chair, I can summarise those three issues if you want on that. Okay, the first one is clause 17, part 1. It requires the council to consult with either their own conservation officer or the staff and historic buildings council. So the first thing is, the requirement is to consult. Consult can mean lots of things, but consult does not mean taking the advice of or following the advice of. So I think we would view as consult as a bit weak in those circumstances, and that effectively it's this balance: is this bill going to be used to overturn the safeguards in the planning acts? And that's where the concern is, because the assessment of an application for demolition is quite a high test now under the planning acts, but there are potential risks that the dilapidations bill could be used to bypass those tests. So it's a bit more than consult. We're suggesting goes into 17.1. 17.2 is who is giving that advice within the council. The Institute of Historic Building Conservation came out of the Association of Conservation Officers of Local Authorities. It started out in that way. And if we go back 20 years or so, pretty much every council had a conservation officer, and most of those conservation officers were dedicated conservation officers. Now, at the moment, there are actually very few dedicated conservation officers in local authorities, and you quite often find it's just I'm not being derogatory here, but if you like, an ordinary planning officer, if you like, is given the job of being the conservation officer, and they don't have any special training, they don't have accreditation, they're not members of the Institute of Historic Building Conservation. There's very few, I think 2 or 3 most.
There's one member.
One member, right. So we're suggesting that there isn't really the expertise not sufficient expertise within councils at the moment to be able to sort of give good advice on this balance between the requirements under the Dilapidations Bill and the legislation, the planning legislation. Now, and councils at the moment do take professional advice outside of that. Belfast City Council, for instance, when it came to the bank buildings situation, the building control in Belfast City Council hired in a specialist conservation accredited structural engineer to advise the council on how they approach what happened to bank buildings. So quite often councils do bring in external expertise. At the moment in the bill, the way the bill is at the moment, if councils do that, it'll be at their cost. So there are provisions in the bill for council to reclaim costs, but for doing works and things to the buildings, we're suggesting that the council should be able to, if they feel they need expert advice and they have to bring that in, they should be able to put that charge back onto the building owner in the same way as there's charges going in other ways. And that seems a reasonable way both to encourage councils to take the advice, but to make sure it's not the ratepayers that are paying the money for this. The cost should go back to the building owners that are under that. And I can expand on these issues if I want later on. And the third point then under 17.1b is at the moment the way it's written is that Council is to consult with the Department of Communities officers, which effectively is Historic Environment Division officers, but it's limited to a heritage site, which is an historic monument. Now, just to explain the difference of that, a heritage site in the legislation is written pretty broadly and includes conservation officers, conservation areas, listed buildings, and the broad sweep of heritage. But under the terminology of a historic monument, that's a very tight definition. That is only sites which are scheduled monuments under the legislation, of which there would be relatively few coming in under effectively this legislation. So at the very least, that requirement to consult with the Department of Communities should include listed buildings as well, which is the bread and butter of HED's work, really. So we're not sure why that's been missed out, but it does seem to be a significant omission in the legislation. Our final point on that is that even though what's being potentially demolished or affected may not physically affect a listed building which is close to it, there is in the planning legislation the definition of the setting of a listed building. So in other words, things that happen around the listed building which could affect its character or its significance. At the moment there doesn't seem to be consideration of the setting of listed buildings or monuments taken into account in the current draft legislation. So I think that those points that we've made, they're relatively technical points, and I think they would make a significant difference to both the effectiveness of the legislation, but also this balance between, regeneration and protection and demolition.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. You mentioned more, I don't know if you're aware of Lisburn. My office is in Bridge Street in Lisburn, which is a street of heritage. It was done under the last heritage. And you can see where if you have building owners who are going to engage, you can see the huge potential if we got it right. But unfortunately, as you go up that street, you can see when you fail to engage or get the right engagement with a site or building owner, where it can literally spoil the investment. And it was a significant investment at the time by Lisburn Council, and I'm not sure if DfC were maybe involved in that at the time.
Yeah, that was pretty generous grant aid percentages to owners of those buildings who engaged in the scheme. And so you're right, where it works very well. But where you have a building owner who is reluctant.
So because we've got that experience and that learning, I'm not so optimistic in regards to this bill that it would be able to tackle that same problem. So we understand the issue that needs to be sorted out. So if you take that straight from me to sort of visualise it in terms of, do you see the potential in this bill to address that? And I'm not sure it does, because you brought up at the start of your conversation that getting the balance right between the carrot and the stick. And I know there's complexities with the site and building owners, because some people will buy them as an investment and maybe won't worry too much about it falling into a state of repair. But some people inherit them, and it can be a little bit of an albatross for some people, because they've maybe inherited them but they don't have the money to do that. So is there a model anywhere that you've seen works best in terms of getting the balance right between carrot and stick?
Well, I suppose there's degrees of these things. I mean, there's one very successful example in Northern Ireland, Sand Mills, where using existing legislation, because it was a listed building, it's the only case I think ever in Northern Ireland where the full extent of the current legislation under the Planning Act effectively was used, and that was a building which was slowly going derelict in Sand Mills, the old stables in Sand Mills, and that after years and years of trying to persuade the owner to do it, eventually the owner the building was vested off the owner by the council, but then transferred back to back in an arrangement to a local building preservation trust, which took on the building, restored it through grant aid, which had already been teed up through the Heritage Lottery Fund and others, and then that building is now community run in the centre of Sand Mills. So that's a good example of the potential of the legislation with grant aid to work, but the fact I've only got you one example in the whole of history of the legislation shows that it's a rare example. I suppose what I would have thought could work in this, because this does start to put financial penalties onto owners who are deliberately letting their buildings fall down. But I agree with you that there are genuine owners who just don't have the resources to be able to do things, or that the commercial realities of the time means that you could spend a lot of money in the building, but you wouldn't be able to get to rent it out, or you wouldn't get a commercial back on. And that's where grant aid and using the rate system and things like that come in.
And the correlation between the change of use of a building too, which is key, because all of our high streets have changed in terms of what happens there too.
I mean that was a bigger question, doesn't it, about how do you make these town centres attractive places for people to live in again? And do you mind if I jump in here, because
you're evidently into the existing legislation, which is somewhere I kind of wanted to go and see how this maps across. There's a push-pull here that I've also come across, is that when if you like, the certification of dilapidation, for instance, so if you have a building which is dangerous, I've noted where councils and agents go into dispute as to whether something can be demolished, because maybe a structural engineer has issued a certificate that says this should be demolished, but then unfortunately, as happens, you get another certificate from someone else that says, well, actually no it doesn't, this can be restored. Is there anything we can do? Because that then you end up with this legal dispute which goes absolutely nowhere, it just ends up tying the thing up.
Well, it's a tricky one. You're absolutely right. I mean, I've been in a situation where I've had conflicting advice from two separate structural engineers. What I would say is that there are structural engineers who are accredited conservation structural engineers who are used to dealing with listed buildings and old rickety structures and things like that. I've got the experience to know how to do it. That's not taught in universities. A lot of structural engineers will come out and be qualified and be working and would not have the first notion what to do with a traditional building. And that's why the accreditation system works, so that councils in particular could get the right advice. So there are CARE accredited structural engineers in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, there are 4 CARE accredited structural engineers in Northern Ireland. Many of whom are part of Institute of Historic Buildings. So I suppose it's for the councils or the designated conservation officer to be able to access that network and get that information from them to be able to make that decision, rather than be sitting with 2 reports that say different things. At least one has an accreditation, and then they know, even at whatever cost that might be, that the building can be saved.
I think that's going to be quite useful, because the pressures that are on to the financial pressures to make the changes and so on, someone has to make a decision at some point. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
No, thank you for that. Aoife.
Oh, thanks. Just in terms of lessons that have been learned in other places, like Robbie has asked, you've given an example here in the north, but is there any other, I suppose, international examples that you have considered where legislation has worked?
Well, I suppose there isn't the direct equivalent of this dilapidations bill, but there are provisions in English and Scottish legislation. I mean, that's a booklet from Historic England, which is their guidance document on how to use the legislation. So it's a guide to enforcement action to save historic buildings, and it's quite a chunky document, as you can see. And similarly, there's one equivalent in Scotland as well. They've tended to use to refine the legislation which exists at the moment under our planning acts, rather than have a separate dilapidations bill. But they've refined the legislation. It's a bit more encompassing than we have in Northern Ireland under the planning acts. But they've gone down that route and used that legislation. Local councils, then each local council have also developed their own local legislation in terms of using the planning acts. and that. So there's a much more active way, which even extends to the celebrated case of the Wonky pub in England a year or so ago, which was not a listed building, not protected in any way, but it was regarded as a local heritage building, and the owners demolished it without permission, and they've now been forced to rebuild it completely. And that building wasn't even protected by, if you like, the national legislation, but it was a local list, which was something the council had drawn up. So I suppose what I would say, there's been much more proactive use of the powers that exist under the Planning Act, but the focus of that is on buildings of heritage merit being put back into use. The Dilapidations Bill goes wider than that, because a lot of the buildings it's going to affect are not necessarily buildings of heritage merit. Its focus, as I read it more, its focus is about regeneration of village and town centres, and it's trying to get rid of the dereliction and dilapidation that's within them. So the Dilapidations Bill, I suppose why we welcome it is because the vibrancy of town and village centres affects not just the people who live in them and work in them and things, but it affects the general state of the historic environment within those town centres as well. Because the buildings are looked after, then they're going to be invested in and maintained. So I think I suppose why we see it as good, this approach, is because it's a wider bit of legislation than just focusing in on historic buildings and conservation areas. And what our concern would be is that there's adverse effects on the conservation areas in the drive regeneration, because if it's not a listed building, it's not a protected building, then demolition and rebuilding quite often will be the easy option and maybe the cheapest option.
And I appreciate your answer, and that's very useful. But I suppose I would go further than that again. Is there any examples across Ireland and across Europe?
In Ireland, each county council has a designated conservation officer now, and they're appointed now as part of that. A success story that someone who came to give us a presentation was from the town of Ramelton in Donegal, where the county council conservation officers had worked with a local business. It's a bit like our Townscape Heritage, and done a successful scene there in terms of regeneration of the high street in some Donegal towns. So I think the difference we would see there in terms of that is they have designated conservation officers within their councils as well, which helps them making decisions and having that accreditation, as we spoke about with the chair.
Okay. And just lastly, the IHBC often talks about heritage as climate action. So do you think that this bill helps embed that idea by prioritising over rebuild?
Well, the quote we always use is the greenest building is the one that already exists. So our remit would be to see the reuse of that. I suppose it can't be at any cost in terms of danger, risk to the community and that, but that should be the starting point for that with a historic listed and important building or monument.
Yeah, there's a lot of evidence, growing evidence. The condemnation of existing buildings or heritage buildings has always been that they're cold and damp and leaky and everything like that. And much better to knock it down and build a nice new building which conforms to all the modern regulations. Firstly, there's a huge amount of work being done now on how to successfully upgrade historic buildings. There have been lots of disasters in the past, including what we saw in the news about external insulation and the failures of that. But there's been a working party between the statutory bodies of England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, which RHED are represented on, and they've produced very good guidance now on how to upgrade traditional buildings to make them suitable. And all the evidence of that is that that's a much lower carbon use than demolishing and starting again. So we're going to see an even greater thrust towards reuse of existing buildings, not necessarily historic buildings at all, old 1960s and 70s office blocks and things being repurposed and reused. So the climate change agenda is driving in the right direction of keeping existing buildings, but it's quite a complex subject in itself, that in terms of how to do it right.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
thank you. John?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to you both. Look, I think this is very useful information you've given us, and your knowledge of the heritage of our town centres, and most important as we try to refine and define any bill that comes forward, given that it's better than, and you've acknowledged this, the current do-nothing position. The two areas, and they're not the only two areas, by the way, that I'm particularly interested in relation to the bill, but two that I'd like to focus on in relation to our discussion are, first of all, the carrot and stick thing. Now, this committee talks a lot about carrots, not always in a horticultural or agricultural way, I should add, on a very regular basis. The carrot on this one, I'm keen to know if you think it should involve some criteria. Because whilst I have as a local councillor for a number of years before I came here to be an MP, and involved in other community activities as well, and many, many times I have encountered those who are deliberately property banking their asset until a later stage for value or for change of use, and there are planning challenges there, which I acknowledge. But you know, we need to caution against using public funds to boost profitability, especially for those who may not need their profitability boosted through public funds. So the criteria to the carrot is the question I'm asking very specifically. Do you agree with that? And I'm acknowledging fully, by the way, and you will have experienced these people, those who are asset rich in this regard, but cash poor and limited in their means, and I totally acknowledge that.
Yes, there's already, I suppose under, I think it was PPS 16, which is enabling development. So there's a procedure under the planning law where a consideration can be made of the economic cost of restoring a listed building in this particular case, and where that's genuinely not viable to do, there's a potential for what's called enabling development to come in. So you might get granted planning permission for something that you wouldn't normally get permission for, like potentially building some extra development on non-zoned land in the area or something like that. And there's, as a result, because that's obviously a system potentially open to misuse, so there's quite a lot of work done on how do you genuinely calculate whether there is what's sometimes called a conservation deficit. So when the cost of your restoration exceeds what the final value of your building is going to be, you've got a gap there, which is a conservation deficit. And that can be filled by grant aid, as in the township heritage schemes. And again, there's financial mechanisms there. It could be fulfilled by offering a rates holiday for a period of time, for instance, under that. Or it could be fulfilled by enabling development, so giving planning permission for something which you wouldn't actually normally get permission for. So there are some mechanisms for trying to address that conservation deficit. But it's important that that's a genuine conservation deficit, obviously, rather than, as you say, just boosting profits of that. The conservation deficit calculations do allow for a developer to make a modest profit on it, because obviously nobody's going to do something unless they're going to make some money out of it. And I think that's around the sort of 15-20% sort of capped level. So there are mechanisms, again, used up until now under the planning legislation, but could be applied to something like this as well.
Would you accept, though, that there may well be those property owners, property developers in particular, but not solely property developers, who were fully aware of the heritage and conservation value of their asset at their time of purchase, and may not need public funding to rectify that which has gone wrong, and that the bill will go some way indeed in relation to that, because that will tackle the property banking issue that I referred to earlier, where there is a conservation or heritage aspect of this.
It's a good point under that, and there is recognition in how you calculate the conservation deficit, which basically says that people knowingly paid too much for it in the first place. They don't get recompense for having paid too much for it. So there are cases where people will pay more than the site's worth because they've got a long-term view of thinking this is property banking and they'll get something in the future. So it's a fairly careful calculation has to be made under that.
My second area of interest that I want to address today is the issue of challenges other than the material building, dilapidation. Do you have experience of dilapidation occurring where owners of properties have been simply unable to restore a building, for example in town centres for leisure or retail use, because of A, planning restrictions, or B, current infrastructure deficits where there's no wastewater infrastructure there to turn a former financial institution, we know how banks have disappeared from our high streets, into something that's leisure or recreation related? I mean, I have two really good examples of this, and like Robbie, a town centre location for my office, and other members will be the same. I have two former banks, glad to say both are currently planned for redevelopment. One is planning permission dependent though. The one of them's a listed building, one isn't. The one that isn't is cafe culture waiting to happen, arched, covered exterior, right on the high street, but has lain vacant like the other one for a worrying number of years. The main reason for that is anybody who wants to convert to hospitality will find out pretty quickly that there's no wastewater infrastructure to take the wastewater across the road, where other buildings are better served. That's okay for multinationals in many instances, but where an independent local trader or hospitality provider is hoping to invest in their area, they are less likely to have the means to put in that wastewater infrastructure. So would you agree that there's an interdepartmental aspect to all of this, and that infrastructure for conservation of our heritage is also crucial, because change of use may be necessary?
Yes, and it is a particular issue, and I would say it's possibly even worse for historic buildings and buildings in tight town centres, because they don't necessarily have the land around them to be able to put in separate wastewater infrastructure, or to say even separate out storm and things. So there is a particular current issue. Now, obviously that's a relatively recent issue, but it is a real current issue in terms of getting reuse of buildings, in particular in tight urban centre populations. Change of use is, our experience is slightly more flexible than that. Historic buildings, HED historic buildings, tend to be quite flexible in terms of the actual use of the historic building. Where it comes in obviously is if it means radical changes to the building to accept that use. But change of use can quite often be a bigger problem for neighbours, neighbourhood, in terms of noise, sort of hours of use and things like that.
Parking, whatever.
Parking issues. So a change of use can bring other problems, but I suppose our experience is that we found Historic Environment Division fairly flexible.
We find them flexible, but the NI water restrictions are a stumbling block in a couple of projects we have. In this case, it's small towns, villages taking on churches that are no longer in use to use as a community space, and they're finding it difficult even to link to the network and not getting permission for that, even though we might have planning permission unless a building consent to do that. So we have a couple of issues like that as well,
Yeah, Hilltowns and that.
Hilltown and in Clocky, yeah.
The version of small schools could be another one that's coming further down the line as well.
Thank you, John. As you can see, there's a lot of interest here today. Could I just finish John's point out, or maybe I don't know if it was John's, it certainly struck me that there's also a shortage of skilled work people in specific areas. So there's a challenge of, so for instance, we know we can't get thatchers. Yes. And there's no programme to bring them on. So I know this isn't about that, but you look at the historic buildings and the conservation areas, they are heritage and conservation for a specific reason. And a lot of that can't be replicated now. Is there any work ongoing? And I want to keep this brief because I want to bring other members in. Is there anything that you're aware of?
We could both talk to you for a couple of hours on that.
The CITB have been quite good at setting up and doing training for that, so they are very much leading that, and we would work with them on that. But there is a shortage of traditional skills in lead work, in stonemasonry and thatching, on all heritage skills that needs to be actively promoted.
Yeah, I think there's been various initiatives, and CITB and the regional colleges have been trying things, and there's a fairly broad group which is coordinated by the Historic Environment Division at the moment, with all the bodies, professional bodies and trades bodies and CITB contractors. And they're trying various initiatives. I mean, part of it is trying to get apprenticeship schemes working quite well, but that has been sporadic, I would have to say, in that the requirements on apprenticeships now are quite demanding on employers coming in, and a lot of employers are reluctant to take on the responsibility for apprenticeships. In particular, with the traditional skills, I mean, this applies across the construction industry, but traditional skills, there's not quite enough flow of good quality work to get specialist contractors in. So in England, Scotland, you have main contractors who specialise in conservation work. They can bring in apprentices, they can train people up because they've got a continuous flow of work. In Northern Ireland, we don't tend to have specialist main contractors. We have a lot of specialist subcontractors. But the main contractors, the bigger contractors, tend to hire in those specialist subcontractors, and that doesn't leave as much scope for bringing on apprentices and training apprentices. So there is a skills gap there, absolutely.
Thank you. And members, just aware we have another couple of evidence sessions programmed in this morning too, so if you could please be as concise as possible. William?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the presentation. How do you see this bill, and do you believe it will be effective or not?
I think it could be effective if the councils, in particular the councils, have dedicated resources to it and get the right advice and right expert advice. At the moment, I would have to say, and hopefully nobody takes offence at this, I don't think the capacity is there in the planning offices, in the local councils, the expertise or the capacity to take this on effectively. So I would say if it's going to come in and be used, then there will need to be an investment in the resources within the councils to do it.
My experience with planning, and I've quite a bit of experience to deal with them on a regular basis. You say there's issues around planning, but in my experience, planners consult HED in every instance of this, setting on listed buildings or anything near listed buildings. Planners are quite rigid in the fact that they accept, in my experience, accept HED's response to these situations.
Well, I suppose there's both the planning officers and the councillors then in terms of what they accept as well. I mean, there has been a rise in cases where councillors have overridden the advice of HED, and then of course it gets potentially called into the Department of Infrastructure for a sort of final look at that. So that mechanism is there, and I do see that happening. I think in this particular case, I mean, you can imagine what I would say coming from our point of view is that we think HED normally give quite good advice, but there are cases where things are more balanced or more nuanced, and that's where you need potentially some external expertise to come in and sort of give that judgment. In the dilapidations issue, I imagine that economics are going to be, play an even more significant part in this. So where does that expertise come in when you've got a building owner or developer who is making the economic argument, and then who's assessing that economic argument? Because the councils, I don't think, have that expertise. Again, if they need that expertise, they should be able to bring it in and then, if necessary, charge that back to the landowner as well. Because I don't think it's the council that should be taking on the financial cost of this. I would imagine councils will be nervous about proceeding down, actually doing the works to the buildings or taking over the buildings, because they'll be worried about not being able to get that cost back. Now the mechanisms are there in the bill for them to put a charge in the building and eventually recover the cost of the building sold. But the experience of a similar bit of legislation under the Planning Act would suggest that councils will be very, very reluctant to go down that road, because they could be expending quite a significant amount of money for some years before being able to recoup those costs, if they ever recoup the costs. So that's, I suppose, why the stick is important, but getting the carrots there to encourage owners to invest in their properties is as equally important, through, say...
That's going to be quite difficult in some situations. I'm aware of a local village to me. There's one old house, tin roof, single story, whitewashed walls, part of the back walls fell out of this. It's listed. That's why it's lying the way it is. It's 50 years. In my eyes, ATD are very rigid in their terms of listing. There are buildings well worth being listed, but there's other buildings, and well, I mean, it's a judgment call, of course. But some other buildings, you just wonder why they are listed.
Yeah, and that's a judgment call. It is possible to challenge the listing, obviously, is to get expert advice and say, does this building meet the criteria for listing? There is a mechanism for doing that. But I don't know the particular building you're talking about, but there are, my experience is that in a lot of cases there are solutions to it, but it may involve, selling it on to somebody who really wants to restore it or finds a way to restore it, or finding a mechanism for a change of use can potentially bring grant aid in, depending on what the use of the building is. But they are difficult situations, and I have to accept that. Complex. I've spent 40 years trying to deal with them, and sometimes we get it right, and sometimes we can't find a solution to them. So they're
just seen
difficult.
In one paragraph here that the average cost the council must work out 7.3 grand per property. That would seem very low. That's on 19 or 2018 prices. Today, after COVID, prices are probably up 35 or 40%.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to predict. What I understand is the first stage would be to go in and do works which stop things getting worse. So they're not things that are going to restore the building, but there would be relatively simple things like replacing rainwater goods, or fixing a few slates in the roof. So they're designed. The initial work that the council would do, if they can't get the owner to do it, would be those sort of emergency, urgent repairs to stop slates sliding off into the street, for instance, or to stop water getting in, to stop the building getting worse. I don't know how those particular figures were arrived at, but it's
not so sure. Wouldn't do very much.
No, £7,000 wouldn't do very much on average. But sometimes it is the simplest things, like replacing a gutter or downpipe, which is pouring water into the property, or fixing loose slates, which can be significant.
Stopgap job.
They're stopgap, absolutely they are. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, William. And Michelle, final word?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. And I think probably most of what I was going to say has been covered. You'd be great, glad to know. Thank you very much for your presentation. It's incredibly useful, and I suppose it does articulate the concerns that I've had in relation to the bill, that this essentially could become a passport for demolition, which would worry me. I'd like to take you up on your offer within your paper about sending further information just in relation to the council conservation officers, if that is possible to do. And just to ask, in relation to those officers, would they tend to sit within would they tend to be planners, or would they sit within building control or elsewhere within council?
Within planning.
Yeah,
Yes.
they're primarily planners.
So it's a good point you make, because obviously some of the knowledge about dangerous structures would lie within the building control officers. Again, I would say, and I work with building control officers every day, building control officers receive practically no training in historic buildings whatsoever. There did used to be a man called Joseph Burt, who started in Downpatrick Building Control, but was interested in historic buildings and became a sort of advisor to all the councils on historic buildings. He's left the councils now. He's actually chair of the Historic Buildings Council, but he doesn't have that role, and as far as I know, that role hasn't been replaced. So yes, building control have expertise in building structures, but they don't have any particular training in or expertise in conservation works. So there's a skills gap there, I would say, in terms of ongoing professional training of building control officers, in particular if they're going to be involved in making judgments on dilapidation and bill. So we might follow up, as you say, with a bit more information on the skills and the accreditation of the equivalent officers in Britain and in the south as well, because they have do have dedicated conservation officers now within every council.
And William touched on it just in relation to HED, who I think do a tremendous job. But I suppose that there are times whenever it does feel that they are maybe a little bit more rigid in their approach, and sometimes perhaps some of the requirements that they ask for then can be cost prohibitive. As a consequence of that, then maybe developers or those who own properties then step back. The property then, by virtue of that, then falls into disrepair and then beyond repair.
Yeah. I think, as William said, some of these judgments are subjective, you know, so there's always a bit of wriggle room, and I've been in private practice all my life, so I've spent a lot of my life arguing with HED, heritage architects, but at the same time share the general thrust of that. So I suppose from our point of view would say the building owners need to have expert advice on their side as well, and HED will respect that if there's, you know, if they've got good advice and the criteria are there and written in the legislation. So, you know, it should be an objective judgment. Does this building meet the criteria or not? Is what you're proposing to do to the building, is it going to change the character adversely or not? It can be difficult, but in circumstances, mostly if you present the arguments right, including economic arguments, HED will listen.
Often those cases are when there isn't a conservation professional involved. There's always a middle ground in some way and a solution to be followed through, and that for the building owner and HED, that can be the conservation professional, but also then within the council, if there were conservation officers that can also guide on that, that would often result in a successful compromise with that. I think that's when we find it most useful, when those people are involved, so you're not having two extremes on either side of the judgment to be made.
And the officers in the councils don't necessarily need to be new people, new salaries. It's providing training to the people that are there as a thing. And the professional bodies, IHBC, RSUA, engineers, do offer that training and will provide that training. There's quite a bit of work going on with CPD at the moment to get that training embedded into the government, central government departments. There isn't that same at the moment in councils. But the training would be available. So we're not suggesting that, you know, councils have to go out and employ a new person here at a new salary, but there is definitely a skills gap there, which in particular, if they're going to be implementing a dilapidations bill, I would suggest that training of council officers needs to go along with that.
Thank you.
William, just because I like you, you've got a wee one now. Just make it a wee one.
There needs to be, extra training for planners, but planners in the main, in my experience, accept the consultation from HED. So planners don't make that decision. Very, very rarely they advise.
But in this dilapidations bill, they're only consulting HED at the moment on scheduled monuments. We're suggesting that should be extended to listed buildings. But for all the buildings and conservation officers, there's no mechanism in this for them to consult HED. It's within their own council.
It's not within the bill.
Not within the bill.
But it is common practice.
Not for unlisted buildings and conservation officers in conservation areas. It's not common practice. That HED will very quickly say that's not our responsibility. So in an unlisted building and a conservation officer, the decision making is pure. It's conservation area. The decision making is purely within the councils.
And much like this is one of the fears. The bill starts off with may. There's no must in it.
Yes.
And may always, and that's one of the discrepancies will be council's appetite.
Yes.
As well.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think you'll have assessed that there's significant interest on the committee for this bill, awareness, and the team are absolutely hungry for more information. So thank you very much for spending so long with us today, and thanks to the members for those very useful questions. Will certainly form part of our committee's output. So,
and if you're happy, Chairman, we will follow up with a bit more on training of conservation officers and that sort of professional development side.
That would be very useful. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, members. Okay, thank you. The next agenda item is agenda item 7. We're staying on the dilapidation bill, and we're going to have an oral evidence session with Retail NI. So, members, I'm going to refer you to the pack starting at page 333 for the relevant briefing paper. So, I'm going to welcome the following representatives from Retail NI to the meeting and invite them to provide their evidence to the committee and answer any questions on that. We will have Mr. Glyn Roberts, Chief Executive, and Mr. George Dorrian, the Policy Advisor. Just make members aware, we are going to facilitate a sort of a live photograph, if you don't mind, in terms of this session for Retail NI. So we'll just conduct the meeting as normal, and I think Michael is going to assist us with that. So that'll take place just at some point during the meeting when we have all of the members in attendance. Is that okay, Michael? So, Sarah? Yes. But even, yes, if you wait till you set back, okay. Thank you. Good to see you both, Glyn and George. So if you're ready, when you have your papers in front of you, if you want to brief the committee and then take some questions at the other side of this. Thank you so much.
Sure, thank you very much for the opportunity. I'll sort of maybe talk just initially the slightly bigger picture, and George will go through some of our points about the actual bill itself. I think the first thing to say, it is very clear that we are in the midst of not just a dilapidation crisis, but a dereliction crisis throughout all of our towns, cities and villages, with 25% of non-domestic units, buildings, call it what you like, now vacant. That is probably the highest, if by a significant mile, in the UK. So we have a serious crisis there, and whilst there isn't a single or silver bullet, there is no doubt that this dilapidation bill is a small but significant step towards that. And if we are to fix our high streets or town centres, it's lots of small projects, it's lots of incremental small things that will ultimately make a difference. And we believe that this is a step forward. But I think, to be very clear, this on its own will barely scratch the surface of those challenges that we face. We were involved, I was one of the chairs of the High Street Task Force, the executive set up in the last mandate. It produced a very good report with 14 recommendations, sign up of all the key departments, and indeed some 33 business trade union and the council representative as well. Sadly, since the Assembly has been restored and the Executive restored, the High Street Task Force has not been recalled. And centre of that was a 5-year High Street reconstruction programme. And the big challenge is you have so many different departments that have skin in the game with High Street regeneration. And the problem with getting them all over the line, all coordinating, all communicating, is a big challenge. And that was one of the things the High Street Task Force did. It brought together all of the key players around the table. I think there's a couple of just, I suppose, brief observations that one of the things we clarified, and the department gave this yesterday, because you're aware that DAERA currently have responsibility for village and towns below 5,000 square foot. This does not apply. This applies across the board, so there's no, if you like, population limit in this. I think it will have significant challenges for councils, and George will cover that. And obviously, I know the councils have made themselves representation on that. I think there are some issues about clarification. What is a structure? What is a building? What is it? Dilapidation versus dereliction. In my view, they're two sides essentially of the same coin. So there are some definitions there that I think do have to be clarified in there. But I am absolutely optimistic that we can turn around the situation. I wouldn't be doing this job if I didn't believe that. And in many respects, looking at the high levels, almost industrial levels of dereliction and dilapidation in our town centres and high streets, instead of seeing them, and indeed it's about changing that narrative, about changing that conversation, instead of seeing them as the failed businesses of yesterday, It's about seeing them as the new businesses of tomorrow. This was some good work been done in terms of Department of Finance with the Back in Business scheme, which gives new start businesses that take up an empty, derelict or dilapidated building 50% rates relief for the first 2 years. So there are some things that are being done, but the big issue, it needs to be done in a coordinated manner, and that's how ultimately, really, what success looks like, is creating 21st century high streets, which are multifunctional hubs, not just retail and hospitality, but lots of different service providers, living communities. I think that is the challenge of what we need to. That's the promised land. And it's not even really about selling retail or hospitality, it's about selling destinations. And I think the blight of dereliction is almost now become a mental health issue, because people have an emotional connection with their local high streets, with their town centres. And there's nothing more depressing when you see derelict building, closed shops. So there are some significant issues on that front. What we're doing as an organisation, we're working in early stages on a paper about how we revitalise our post office network. We hope to be launching it here next year. So we have lots of ideas, and I think it is about how we get that solution-based approach to these challenges. So, Chair, with your permission, I'll hand on to my colleague George.
Okay. Thank you. Just, I think it's important to start by saying that we do welcome the bill. There's no doubt about that. It's been an issue which has been a concern for many years, and there was a lot of expectation. There was a lot of build-up that the bill was coming forward. So whenever it's now here, we do welcome it. One of the challenges, however, is making sure that it's right and it's actually fit for purpose, and that's just the concern that we'd have to make sure that is the case. There's a number of issues there. There's a lot of emphasis put on being extra powers for the councils, but as you're aware, a lot of the councils that we know that certainly we deal with are under pressure and funding. They don't have spare funding for this to put in, and there's a big emphasis on being proactive and going for. Councils need to be proactive. One example, if I can give you, from last year, there was a request put in last year to do a list of dereliction, and actually I think it was Belfast Council who actually said that they would find that a struggle to do that. So whether or not the resources are there, we learned from the devolution of planning powers that if you don't resource properly, the issues continue over time. I think a lot of people would agree that planning it's getting better, but it still faces its challenges. Some of the other issues as well, in terms of the terminology in it, in terms of detriment, serious detriment, there are concerns there. Not that anybody's disagreeing with it, just that it needs to be tightened up and it needs to be stronger. Cost recovery has always been an issue. Again, there's a big emphasis on recovering costs from if people are identified to be in breach. But that has always been a challenge, and one of the things at the minute I think it proposes for a fine, I think it's £500 for it, but realistically, as a building owner, that it won't cut it in terms of, I think nearly almost everybody agrees that it needs to be further, it needs to be raised to be actually an incentive for people to actually to act. Emergency action, one of the things that we're aware of, for example, and I don't think it's mentioned in the bill, is if, like as we had last week, if you have serious storm damage, there's not actually in a lot of council structures for building control to be on site to address that, who may be needed as an emergency. Sometimes it's almost comes down to volunteers to come forward. So there's those sort of practical things that we think should be strengthened and should be put into the bill, which actually will directly impact the buildings themselves, so are the structures. But I think actually the councils will actually welcome this as well. It's not just ourselves as retailers there. I think it's actually given them much clearer direction. So what we would say is that certainly in terms of the bill, it's very, very welcome. It's a great opportunity, but it's just one of the things, if we can strengthen and maybe work and take on board some of the concerns, we can get a much better piece of legislation from this.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for your presentation. To you, it's really good to have you on here in regard to this. And I noted that this, both of you have said this, that it is a step forward. It may be small, but it could be significant. And there was a point that you raised there, George, and I've raised it once on committee, but you've absolutely touched on it. So the legislation that currently we deal with dilapidation, dereliction is slightly different, but it speaks to the same thing because there's a massive overlap. Because what we are dealing with is intervention, but actually we should be dealing with prevention too. And I think that's what you're getting at in terms of the storm damage, for instance, or a derelict building which can lead to dilapidation, and that is an omission at the moment, I think, from the bill, in terms of when you wait for it to become too costly to repair, then you end up in these legal battles, which is something maybe we should look at the scope of the bill, of maybe seeing if there is something that we can do in there. Is there anything in particular you think in terms of where the bill is, particularly with that regeneration of the town centres? And most people talk about the carrot and the stick, and the balance is almost impossible to achieve. But is there anything that you think could be done, or assistance given, or even processes, which is probably easier to get than assistance, that would see an improvement on the bill, rather than a small step that it could become a bigger step?
Well, I think it's the problem on its own. It is fine, but it doesn't scratch the surface of the challenge and the scale of the problem. We have industrial levels of dereliction and dilapidation in our town centres. I was very struck that when I visited, and we're not going to identify the town because I'll probably get into trouble, but it struck me that when I visited a member, and she pointed out, again, either side of her business, there was dilapidated, derelict buildings, both of which are subsidised in one site by the Department of Finance through the vacant property rate. One of them had taken the roof off to get around not paying rates, and she doesn't get any help, doesn't get the small business rate relief scheme. I think there's surely something unfair on that, so that's something we are working through with the Department of Finance, but it needs a coordinated approach. There's about 6 or 7 executive departments that have responsibility for high streets in some shape. It is probably the most cross-cutting issue that the executive faces. I don't think I'm speaking out of term, Chair. At times the executive is very siloed, and getting all ministers on the same page is a challenge. So one of the reasons why we wanted the High Street Task Force recalled, and it was ably chaired by Declan Kearney and Gary Middleton, two juniors in the TEO. It wasn't that it's an end in itself, but it was able to coordinate and communicate and make sure we were all on the same page, moving in the one direction, bringing councils, executive, business, our colleagues in the trade union movement were there. And that's the type of approach that we need. And I think this bill could be far more enhanced if we have other government departments playing their part as well in this. And it's saying this in isolation. Yes, is it positive step forward, but it will not scratch the surface of this problem unless we have every other executive department playing their role in this as well.
I agree with you, and I agree with you on the High Street Task Force piece as well, because it very much would have led us into a much more preventative, proactive space where we could have been better informed. And now, obviously, it's welcome that the bill's coming forward, but we probably could have been stepping off into a better space. I also agreed, and I'm just going to lean into this point, you mentioned the impact on mental health. So, I mean, our environment, the dilapidation of our environment does lead to the social dilapidation. It absolutely does, and all of those things are interlinked. In regard to this then, just to expand on this, will be my final question, do you see any opportunities either with existing legislation outside of this that might help facilitate that wider piece that you're alluding to in terms of the other responsibilities in and around rates, for instance, and that? Or are there other pieces of legislation that need to come alongside to assist it, or is it perhaps in regulation and policy that can be tightened up?
Well, I think, first of all, it's not about necessarily more money. It's about the executive and councils working smarter and having a coordinated approach. I'll give the example. You were dealing with the fallout with the closure of the Kilray Bridge, and that has a huge impact on the town. But again, there are several different departments that can be part of the solution there. Communities, with what they did in Sandy Row with that fund, again, very welcome. There was the Rates Hardship Fund in finance. Now, I know I'm straying a bit, but I'm just illustrating a point that this cannot be done in isolation. I think the other thing, and this is something we've fed through to the Minister at different times, we have members in every village, town and city, and there's no doubt in smaller villages and towns there is a definite feeling from our members they feel left behind, that their voice is not being heard. You have many places that don't have a traders group or a chamber of commerce, and we've worked hard to try and revitalise that chamber network and traders groups. And there is a definite feeling that that those smaller towns, they do feel left behind. They're not getting the big infrastructure investment. They're not getting the focus. And I think that was illustrated again by the situation in Kilrea, with the bridge being closed. We were working and assisting with the traders in Sandy Row. Hopefully we're making progress in that. But again, there's so many different players, departments, and it's getting them on the one page. And that's probably the biggest thing that we would have to say. And it's not just us using this Dilapidation bill to push for other stuff. It's about making sure that we can really, and I believe we can turn this situation around. I wouldn't be doing this job if I didn't believe we couldn't turn it around. But there is a dereliction, dilapidation crisis that needs urgent attention. We cannot sustain 25% of our buildings vacant. That's not just shops, that's bars, restaurants, retail, call it what you like. And what we see for the future of our town centres, multifunctional hubs. So you have service providers, you have police stations, you have health, you have living communities, all of that. It's about much more. It's almost taking that community hub model that it is so important. And I think that's the way that we can focus on it. Not necessarily about more money, it's about working smarter.
And I said that was my final. I've got a wee one. This is just a wee one. Willie does this at me. Says it's just a wee one.
Just one. Sorry, just one slight comment to put on that as well. When you mentioned in terms of departments working across as well, one of the points in terms of we talk about dilapidation and dereliction is ownership of the buildings. A lot of it in terms of certainly we're talking about cost recovery, but there is an issue, and it would be interesting to explore it further around how clear are we that in terms of we have a database of who actually owns all the properties. I know, for example, arterial routes, ones that I know of in Belfast, there was a number of times where actually whenever they fell, actually one only the storm there a fortnight ago, whenever the whole front came off the shop, there was no way of identifying who actually owns the building. There was no way to do that. There's another few examples too that I'm aware of as well. So from that point of view, it would be interesting if the bill is to be effective, how is that a widespread issue in different towns or different routes? Just some of it is just historical, some of it is just owners have passed away. It's natural, but if this is going to happen, then that issue you're never going to address, or you're never going to get cost recovery, but these buildings are going to continue to decline. So that's an area I think too also needs to be looked at. Are we, I think it's probably Department of Finance, is that something that is an issue? It may not be, but I suspect it might be, that there's a lot more buildings out there that we're not clear who is actually the owner of.
Okay. And this is the final one. Thanks for that, George, clarification. This committee obviously is the agriculture environment, but it's the rural affairs piece. So obviously we'll make no excuse for representing our rural towns more specifically in regard to this. So I'm also aware that this legislation is not must do, it's a may do, and then obviously that leaves the discretion to our 11 councils to take whatever approach that they see fit. And I don't want to put you on the spot, and certainly don't ask you to name councils, but obviously you're a membership-led body. Do you see at the moment a discrepancy in terms of councils' attitude towards dealing with dilapidation and dereliction at the moment? And my assessment is this legislation won't see an improvement in that, and if it doesn't exist, it's not a problem, but I suspect that it does. Would it be your experience or not?
Well, one area that has an impact on dilapidation and dereliction is councils still passing applications for out-of-town retail development. Whilst that's not the only reason why that we're in this state and why we're here talking about dilapidation, but it's still a major factor. I mean, we worked hard to get the town centre first retail planning policy over the line, and it has a stricter set of criteria, but it's all about town centre first. We still have councils that want their cake and eat it by passing out of town retail development, which is a direct detriment to town centres and dereliction. And I think what you have is when quite often, and we've seen this with banks closing down as well in high streets and town centres, but when one business closes, that's less footfall for the surrounding traders. And then you start to see that domino effect. And when that happens, it's very, very hard to rebuild that. And I think probably that there's a number of examples of towns, Bangor probably being one of them, where, it lost Bangor city centre now. Hopefully it's going the right direction with the Queen's Parade. That's really good to see. But again, they lost so many high street names that relocated out of town to Bloomfield Shopping Centre. So we've got to make sure we make our high streets or town centres the first port of call for as many businesses as we can, as much footfall as we can, not just retail or hospitality. So I think the councils, they need to have a very, very strict adherence, town centre first. And that means what it says. You cannot give more and more out of town retail development and expect to have vibrant town centres.
And that's when I know that's a big touch point of yours because you've raised it with me before. In that rural aspect then, in terms of the councils that represent more a rural offering, are you finding any pinch there at all?
I think it's definitely, I think there is areas there that we have concerns, but it is, there's only so much we can do. So what we've been doing is proactively supporting local chambers. We've helped set up a number of new chambers because I think it's important, because that role and the day-to-day issues with councils, I think it's important. If you see a strong town, you'll always see a strong chamber of commerce there. And I'm very conscious that some of these chambers and traders groups, they're all volunteers. A lot of them don't have paid staff, but they work incredibly hard and very committed. But I'm absolutely convinced that small towns can turn it around, and there are some really good examples of that. But again, it's getting councils, executive, and indeed, when we had the Levelling Up Fund, it's also about UK government as well being part of that. There, we also had conversations with the Shared Island Fund as well, because they're increasingly doing more in terms of infrastructure investment. So I think it's about aligning all of that.
Okay, no, thank you very much. I really appreciate that, and thank you, members, for your indulgence with myself there. Declan, have you?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for your presentation and the effort you've made to come up here and provide the briefing note. I suppose what has come up in a number of the sessions now is concern over the ability of councils to oversee this. I know that, for example, when our Ulster Architectural Heritage Group are here, they made a point actually that there really is adequate legislation here if it was appropriately enforced, and the question raised about who oversees this. And also then just earlier on today, the Institute of Historic Buildings also raised the issue as well about the expertise within councils and local planners around this here, and compared to the south of Ireland, for example, which has dedicated conservation officers per each county council area. What would be your view on the ability to probably oversee and implement such a piece of legislation?
One of the ideas that we'd had before was, and I know some other groups had this as well, was around the appointment, and I think it's more England, maybe more GB than has like a town architect or a city architect, and I think that's something we had here many years ago, who would have overseen basically in terms of the whole sphere of planning and dereliction and maintaining the townscapes. So that's certainly something that we think should be explored again. There are plenty of experts and people there with the knowledge to do it. It's really whether you do it on a council basis or wider, so you could look at it maybe a different structure, or what way is most appropriate to do that. In terms of resources with councils, I think the expertise is there. It's just resourcing them properly to be able to do it. And I think if there's going to be a much greater emphasis on being proactive, then that needs resourced. I think that's the key to it. The expertise is there. There's a lot of, especially in terms of heritage buildings, there are a lot of committed people and good people who know it, but it's all about resource on this occasion, be able to do it. But I certainly think the town sort of city architect approach is something that should be given a bit of consideration.
I think just to illustrate on another point, give the councils the regeneration powers. I think that would be, we see that in loads of different projects, particularly with the challenges facing Belfast City Centre, with Tribeca and all those different, give the councils the regeneration powers. I think that would help as well. And I think that is something that was promised, but you give the councils power over planning, I think not giving them the regeneration powers, I think hampers their ability to turn the situation around and be that change maker in local high streets.
And just as a wee follow on there, thank you. And Aoife touched on it earlier. I got an example of Say Mills here in the north, which was given by the previous group there as a good example. Would you be aware from your professional experience both here, across the island, across the world actually, where there are good examples of, say, regeneration legislation being used to create the multifunctional hubs that you talked about in there for town centres?
It's not so much legislation. I think there are certainly towns that locally that have that, and I think it's all about changing the leadership structure. It's all about what we call developing that localism approach, and I think that's about changing and revitalising the leadership model. Look, obviously you have some towns that have business improvement districts, and there's about 9 or 10 of them now. That again has been for many towns a catalyst for change. I think towns that have a strong Chamber of Commerce or traders group, again, that's important because that's that leadership model there. And I give, we spend a lot of time, we do our High Street Hero Awards, as you're probably aware, and that's all about recognising the contribution of smaller towns in particular. So there are some really good examples there. Newton Ards is an example where it has a really dynamic independent retail offer. It's a destination. It is a town that has won twice our High Street here, or High Street of the Year. But again, it is a strong local chamber. They've worked really hard in terms of their the offer that they have. So I think it's about that local. Again, it's about that local. How do you empower? How do you revitalise that local leadership model? And again, councils, chambers, and that, as a body, we can't be everywhere. We try and concentrate on the strategic stuff, but that to me is probably it is something we're looking at potentially next year and doing another High Street Summit of bringing international good practice. So it is early stages of working potentially on a paper that will look at that international good practice. And the idea being is that this is something that we can feed into a future programme for government. On that there, the High Street Task Force report, it was always designed to be, if you like, an annex to a future programme of government, but it didn't. The programme of government is very, very vague in terms of, it doesn't even mention high streets or town centres or anything like that. So again, the starting point, if you want to get things moving, recall the High Street Task Force. That would be in terms of, not as an end, but as something that would help coordinate, communicate, and really get a sense of purpose. And I think if the political will is there, we can turn around this situation in terms of our high streets.
There are some really good examples in GB of maybe old train stations, for example, which have been repurposed, as you say, for mostly smaller independent retailers. So they're feeding in, they're actually giving them the opportunity to open up almost like hubs there, where you're getting maybe 10 or 15 smaller retailers, not dissimilar to the one there in the city centre, there where they've repurposed the train station for the food court. But there are some really good examples in GB where old style, really traditional big railway stations have been converted. So the heritage of the buildings have been protected, but they're getting a lot more use now. Some really good examples.
Thank you, George.
Thank you, Declan. And William?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your presentation. Reading between what you're saying is, the fair comment is, I think, to say that you welcome the bill, but in its current state, you have concerns about how effective it's going to be. Isn't that right?
I think on its own, is it a step forward? Yes. But unless we address the planning issue, unless we get business rates right, unless we get infrastructure right, unless we get public transport right, all of those other factors, then this bill will not realise its full potential. So it's about as I said, it's about a coordinated approach. Is it a step forward? Yes. Is it something we welcome? Yes. is there issues that we need more clarification on? I think the views of councils, and I'm sure at some point you'll be having Nilga and Solus in front of you. I think in terms of their view of how this works on the ground, councils will be the best place to see it. But there are a number of clarifications in it, such as what is a structure, what is a building. So there are a number of issues there, and it's something that we're corresponding with the department on.
Our experience with all of us in the past, getting departments to work together seems to be difficult, and there's no coordination.
You don't say.
No, it is, but again, it just comes down to sometimes things like where the levels of fines and all they're talking about, just to be more realistic, to listen to what people think actually will be an incentive for people to opt to work. There's a lot of cases there where it says people have already said where £500 wouldn't incentivise anybody to step forward if they get a notice through. They'll either simply ignore it, or even if they pay it, it's of no consequence to them. It's something. It's about giving the teeth to the bill. Actually, something where people who have the buildings will actually know if they get a notice through the door, we have to do something about this, rather than just dismissing it, or it's just another bit of legislation. I think that's the key.
Yeah, I have some concerns about it from where to go, even from a legal perspective. There could be issues around this. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, William. Useful. John?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks to you both. You've touched on some of the things I'm going to raise. I'm going to do this for consistency because I raised this with the previous delegation also. This issue of infrastructure, I've not quite first hand, but constituency experience of this in my own main town of Antrim, where former financial institutions can't be converted to retail or hospitality because of the wastewater infrastructure on one side of the street. How real is that, and how widespread is that? Can you give us an indication of that? Because it will absolutely feed into the problem with dilapidation. Two examples I gave earlier, both being resolved by the look of it, but they have sat vacant for years where there were no jobs, there was no footfall, no rates revenue coming in, and no additional benefit to the high street.
Yeah, probably the nearest example. Yes, it is. To be clear, yes, it is an issue. One example that I could give you is very close to here on the Newton Ards Road. There was a number of new businesses which would be more hospitality, food-based, beer-based, to be honest, and they had long problems trying to get established. One of them, two of them actually are now open, but could very easily have walked away. Yep. They were buildings which lay for maybe 10 years plus. Yep. The other one, the Portview Centre, is another example, for example, who want to go into that field, in that area, much more hospitality based, but do face challenges. So yes, it is, and also the ones who do get closer, it becomes unviable for them to do it by the sheer cost of them.
Also, George, probably worth mentioning in relation to your own presentation, this was done earlier also, but again, for consistency, multinationals are better placed to invest in wastewater infrastructure privately than your local independent retailer or trader or hospitality provider. Yeah.
Just not an option.
Second question, which is different than the previous presentation. How much is public ownership of buildings, derelict or otherwise, a factor for you? Are there former public buildings or?
Not to integrate. Now, most of the bigger ones would be city centre based, but then again, it's only literally a matter of time. The ones that are now, there's a fallback in terms of office space. For example, if they're trying to sell an office space, there is no great demand for office space at the moment. So if those buildings are being sat without being taken on, then it will become an increasing issue. Maybe more in the sort of larger towns and cities.
But no current trend amongst the towns and villages outside Belfast that we're...
Not that I would see in terms of that there, maybe specifically, but not from a public ownership point of view. But a lot of them are maybe historical, owned by families. You actually tend to see, certainly around Ontario, it's a lot of actually buildings and things have been owned by families over years, which have just tailed off. And that goes back to the point I made earlier in terms of, I would still be querying a wee bit in terms of how up to date are we in terms of ownership of the smaller buildings, a lot of them that we do have.
So I suppose it is connected to this. One of the conversations we're having with Department of Finance is about the future of the vacant property rate, which effectively is the executive subsidising dereliction. It raises about 30 million. And what we've said is, look, what we need to do is, retrofit the current small business rate relief scheme into a high street rate relief scheme, which we get more targeted relief to independent retail, hospitality and leisure, which is the norm in the rest of the UK. Use that vacant property rate into a wider fund. So it's not new money, it's cutting the cake differently. What you're doing is you're focusing the rating system, turn it from a disabler into an enabler. And why should landlords be able to get away with taking the roof off to avoid paying rates? You go to town after town where they've done that, where effectively they're that current policy is subsidising dereliction. The other idea that we put forward is a scale-up rates relief scheme, which would help existing businesses grow, expand their premises, create new jobs, new investment. And this is not just a retail thing, but this could be applied across the board. And so effectively what that could do could give that business 6 months rates relief. And then obviously when they're revalued, it's quids in for land and property services because it'll be a higher rated. So there's some practical things there that don't cost money, that can retrofit and change the existing schemes that are there to make a big difference. And that back in business, or the business bonus scheme, which again gives the 50% rates relief for the first 2 years of a business that takes up a derelict and dilapidated building which has been vacant for a year. that again is a really good example where you're using the rating system to address a particular problem. Now, I think we can look at how we can go further and faster with that. But again, so we're feeding all those ideas in. But again, what I said at the start, that has to align with what every government department. There's no point you doing that type of work if councils are letting more and more out of town retail development happen. So we've got to be very clear. It's about being on the same page in all of this, and it can be turned around. Absolutely. I don't want to be this. Times I'm accused of being a bit of a harbinger of doom, but I am really optimistic. We could do something really bold and innovative.
Also for you, Chair, in terms of rates incentivization, that incentivization for new business to be created in buildings that are currently derelict also remove the potential snag of people getting cash benefits to property bank and increase the value of their asset, but not necessarily using it for retail, hospitality or any other use, or providing jobs, simply renovating the building and until it increases in value. So the rates component there takes away that risk. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, John. Okay. Any other questions from any other members? That was a great session.
Thank you very much, Chair. Pleasure.
That was really good. Thank you so much. I think Sarah has sorted you out, hasn't she?
I think so, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, members, and thank you, guys. Okay. Agenda item 8. Guys, are you content to move on? Or does anybody need a comfort break? Content to move on? Okay, members. Thank you so much. Agenda item 8 is the SR 2025-165, the Farm Sustainability Standard Regulations. I refer you to page 350 to 372 of the pack for the SL5, the SR and the explanatory memorandum. I also refer you to the briefing paper dated 3rd November addressing concerns we previously had in the pack, which started page 337. We have given this matter much consideration recently, and at our last meeting we agreed to request a further oral briefing to address concerns raised during our scrutiny debate. Members, by way of background, we received an oral briefing on the 2nd of October, and we heard that the Department intend to make this SR under negative resolution to replace the current cross-compliance arrangements with the new Farm Sustainability Standards and associated penalty regime from the 1st of January 2026. Members, as you're aware, we have raised a number of queries and considered the Department's response at our meeting on the 23rd of October regarding cross-compliance penalties within the last 5 years. We also queried why a full human rights assessment was deemed to not be required and what criteria would have needed to be met for one to be completed. We considered the response from the Department earlier in matters arising. So members, As you will recall at our meeting on the 23rd of October, we noted the end of the statutory period has been calculated as the 25th of November. We agreed to wait until we heard from officials again today before we took our position on the SR and wrote to the Department outlining our main areas of concern, including the increased powers for an authorised person and the definition of qualifying crops eligible for farm sustainability payments. I refer you to the Department's response dated the 3rd of November, starting at page 337 of your pack. Hopefully you'll have had time to look at that, but that's where it is, 337 for the response, members. I now welcome the following officials from the Agriculture Environment Schemes Division and Agriculture Policy Division to the meeting to answer any further queries we have. We have Mrs. Anna Campbell, who is the Acting Director. We have Mr. George Moffett, who is the Acting Deputy Director. We have Mr. Aidan McEvoy, I think, Head of Branch. And Mrs. Denise Phillips, the Acting Head of Branch. Is that correct? Excellent. You're becoming like family. You've been here that often. Okay, thank you very much. Do you have a further sort of presentation?
Some opening remarks.
Thank you so much. Yes, please.
Thanks very much. Okay, so afternoon everyone, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to provide for further oral briefing to aid the committee's consideration of the draft SR and SL1 for farm sustainability standards, statutory rule and the associated farm sustainability legislation. So these are the two new regulations that are being introduced by the Department. The first is to replace the existing cross-compliance penalty system with a new framework focused on farm sustainability standards. And then the second is to set out the eligibility criteria and conditions for receiving the new farm sustainability payment. So the purpose of this briefing today is, as you've already set out, Mr. Chairman, is to provide additional clarity and assurance to the committee in light of residual concerns, and I welcome the opportunity to provide assurances around the processes, intention and adaptability that's been applied throughout the development of the new FSS and associated penalty regime. So stakeholder engagement has led to the development of FSS and its penalty matrix. In response to consultation during 2018 and 21-22, we have delivered 7 clear FSS which replace the current 20 requirements under cross-compliance. We have ensured that these requirements address issues such as the need for protection of habitats and biodiversity, landscape and heritage. We've introduced education and guidance into the FSS arrangements in order to ensure compliance. We have, where appropriate, introduced controls by remote sensing and administrative checks in place of traditional on-the-ground inspections. We've developed a penalty matrix which is more proportionate, fairer and easier to understand. And the legislation currently laid before the committee is built upon existing frameworks and informed precedents, considering lessons learned from the current arrangements. So maybe looking first to the powers of authorised persons. To protect public money, it is appropriate that the Department seeks and obtains evidence to support payment of grants and subsidies. I can confirm for the committee that there has been no increase to the powers of authorised persons. Rather, this legislation reenacts, without amendment, those already in place since 2015. I would also like to clarify that under these regulations, the Department does not have the authority to seize property. In cases where a business refuses to provide required evidence during an inspection, the Department's response remains limited to withholding payments due to that business. This approach ensures compliance while respecting the rights of individuals. The powers themselves are limited in their application. They are only used for the purpose of carrying out selected inspections and incident referrals. The requirement for this is also set out in legislation and subject to no amendment as a result of the FSS SR. To clarify just some information that we provided in our additional briefing to you before today in the briefing pack, in 2024, for example, these powers were used to complete just over 2,000 inspections for cross-compliance, which resulted in 624 businesses breached. The powers of authorised persons provisions include a safeguard whereby the powers do not extend to a private dwelling house. This respects the rights of farmers under Article 8 of the European Convention of Human Rights, the right to respect for private and family life, which is a key consideration which the Department must consider when developing policy. The Department must also undertake equality and disabilities duty screening, which also includes consideration of the impact of the proposed policy on human rights, including Article 8. This screening ruled out the need to carry out an equality impact assessment. I can confirm that this policy was considered against all Section 75 groups and all elements of the Human Rights Act 98, which brings the European Convention on Human Rights into UK law, with no potential adverse impact on HRA being identified. The next steps on screening, after the formal adaptation of the policy, will be the publication of the Equality and Disabilities Duties Screening for information on the DAERA website, and then subsequently our teams will complete an Equality and Disabilities Duties Screening on the implementation of the policy, so that looks at the delivery elements. The Department acknowledges that the Committee has also in the past expressed concerns regarding penalties applied in respect of very high severity breaches. Additional information to help alleviate the Committee's concerns is set out in your briefing pack, which the Department trusts will offer greater clarity. The breaches that attract the highest level of severity have been very carefully chosen to reflect the severity of damage caused to human and animal health and the environment. So, for example, the most severe instances of water pollution resulting in widespread impacts on fish kill are considered very high breaches of the standards. Such a breach can have significant and long-term, long-lasting impacts on the river ecosystem, water quality, angling and recreation. A second example of a very high severity breach would be the most severe cases of animal neglect and cruelty, which can result in animals suffering such extensive injury that they have to be put down. These examples help establish the types of rationale behind breaches identified as very high severity, and it is worth emphasising that the bottom right-hand corner of the matrix will still be only reached on repetition of the breach. The impacts of these breaches affect not just the farm and the surrounding ecosystems, but they can also have impacts on food security and trade and the reputation of farmers across Northern Ireland. We have found support from all stakeholders on this approach, and I am confident that the vast majority of farmers expect the Department to take action on these cases, and that it is appropriate that the farmer committing these breaches should not receive the same level of public subsidy as the vast majority of farmers who are not. It's worth stressing again, the Department has learned lessons from cross-compliance and, informed through consultation and stakeholder feedback, have developed a more proportionate penalty regime where non-compliance in areas such as animal identification, registration and movement will no longer attract a very high penalty. 3/4 of all underpinning requirements do not carry a severity level that can result in very high breach, and 100% penalty, and that 100% penalty is linked to repetition, noting that the current cross-compliance, where it is possible for a farm business to have a 100% penalty without repetition. Moving to the separate issue of eligibility for the farm sustainability payment in 26, I can confirm that the qualifying crops are the same as the crops that were eligible under the farm sustainability transition payment and the basic payment scheme before that. The requirements associated with the historic years exercise are only applicable in the reference period 2020-21 to determine if a farm business is eligible to apply for FSP in 26. If a farm business satisfies historic years requirements and declares and claims grass on its FSP application, it will be eligible for payment under FSP. The standards, together with the accompanying penalty matrix, are designed to promote greater compliance by providing farmers with clear expectations, practical guidance and access to training. They're more aligned with Northern Ireland's unique landscape and farming practices, ensuring that they're both relevant and achievable. I hope that the clarifications within the briefing and my opening remarks on FSS and FSP have been helpful, and my colleagues and I are happy to answer any additional questions that the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Genuinely, this will be unusual, but I do want to thank you for your work on this because there's a lot of detail in there. There's a lot of questions that have been answered. Some of the questions that the committee have raised, you've without doubt answered those. And certainly from my perspective, it does seem to be a step in the right direction. One of the challenges I think going forward that always exists is for those people who perhaps need to be able to interpret a new regime coming forward, and that information that farmers and their families would receive, and that wider sort of setup at home. Is there a communication strategy ready to roll in a timely manner to inform people of any changes, for instance, where they won't fall foul of the changes? I know there are very few changes, by the way, because much of it is the same as it was before, so it's more around the penalty matrix and the severity and stuff. Is there a comm strategy ready to go?
There is indeed. So we've been planning for this in the background, and obviously part of the standards as they're being put through includes that training and education focus. So we're really looking at actually making things available that are easy to understand and easily available, but they can also be accessible in other formats as required. And that's for people who are not just breaching, but actually just for information. So anyone is able to actually pick up that information and find out, well, what does it mean for me and what am I supposed to do? We want to make it really clear to all farm businesses about what the standard is that is expected of them, so, you know, and the reasons why, because I think that's important when people understand the reasons why they're doing this. So we're building a training regime, and we also have a comms plan in place for that. One of the issues for us remains and always will remain is timing. The closer we get to the time, the less time that we have. So you were preparing in the background and really ready to press the button if we get to that stage in the year to start pushing out those comms, because they're inextricably linked with FSP, and there's a lot of messaging to go out to farm businesses.
Just one question, and I know some of the members have got particular areas and I don't want to cross over into their areas of concern. I've just got to ask one question, and it relates to there was a question in regard to the 5-year period of total number of breaches, the total number of repeated breaches and the number of businesses. So the number of businesses looks to be reasonably static in the 5 years. It goes from 73 to 78. There's a wee blip in there where there's 92 businesses. One of the things that the mate doesn't pull out is the businesses that were breaching, the 73 businesses in 2020 and then 78 in 2024. I'm not going to ask, are they the same businesses, but is there a pattern of businesses more than annually? So in year, I understand if there's a business which repeatedly breaches, but is there any analysis done over a 5-year period to see if the same businesses are repeatedly breaching over a longer period then? Because obviously it's an annual application. I get that.
Yes, I'm not sure if you have some additional. It's the additional letter that we've sent out. So you'll appreciate there's an awful lot of information that we've shared. So we're tracking back to which.
Yeah.
I take it this is the answer, John, to your question that you'd asked us for some additional data at that time. I'm sure that we can, and I'm sure it's something that we do as per our analysis of what how these things are operating. But we can certainly look at the. Sorry, thank you. So your question is about the repeats of the...
Not just within year, but over a 5-year cycle then?
But you're looking specifically, at the numbers that are around the 73 level.
In the what, sorry?
You're looking at it's the letter that was sent through from the DALO on the back of John's
yes,
it's
in the
73 figure,
yes.
67 figure. So we do, but I don't have it to hand in terms of the detail, but it's part of the analysis that we do around who are the big repeaters and
yes.
how do we approach those. And if you think about our penalty matrix and that bottom right hand corner, to get into those places where you are routinely repeating time and time again and you're not taking on board the lessons that are used and the impacts are severe, that you should get to the stage where actually your income is affected by that in terms of the subsidy received.
Yeah, no, I get that, and I've no issue with that, genuinely. I'm just thinking of in terms of, is there anything additional that sits outside of this matrix and the financial penalty to help understand and identify why it potentially is there an annually repeated problem and stuff to lift that business out of there or to encourage them to get out. So the financial aspect obviously is a significant one, but is there anything else that the department can do if it's a repeat?
I think it's something that we would like to be building into the reviews we talked about. So in 26 we're looking to establish our baseline data. 27 is when we start getting that comparison data and we can start to see those elements, and we'll certainly build that into an analysis moving forward of what that means on the ground.
And just add on the incident of a first time breach, there is mandated training to be completed. So built into the education and training. And that wasn't there under cross compliance. Okay. So if somebody has a first time breach, there's mandatory training, which hopefully will improve understanding and lead to.
And this is brilliant because it leads to my very first query, which is in around that information, that there is an additionality. So it's rather than just the stick, there's the opportunity of the additional training or information stuff, which should hopefully drive down those number of individual businesses who are either breaching or repeatedly breaching.
Our absolute intention here is to make sure that someone who is breaching understands why, yes, and understands what has happened, and they're not left in a scenario where they're having an impact of a penalty applied, but they don't really understand the details behind it, and that will help.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Part of the part of the feedback and the consultation was the emphasis on training and education. So this underpins the penalty matrix through guidance as well. So there's guidance letters to get those farmers who may not be compliant to a state of compliance, as well as the training for everyone. So.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. Thank you for getting that. I understand that. Declan?
I suppose the issue that I had raised up previously, it's referenced here in the correspondence. Just to say that the department did not carry out any enforced action. This is in relation to access of computer and other records. The department did not carry out any enforcement action in the event that the farmer or the representative permit this access. That was what I wanted to tease out previously. I know that there had been a feeling expressed at previous meetings that some of the powers which we believed were here were a bit draconian, but this is sort of, in my mind, gives clarification that the department cannot access computer or other records relevant inspection unless the holder, the farmer, or whatever, allows that. You don't carry out enforcement actions as such, is that right?
That's it, exactly. And in essence, actually, the draconian nature of it is nearly when you have to start setting out in legislation the detailed wording that supports what it is we're trying to do. It sounds an awful lot worse. It sounds sort of confusing and complicated. But in essence, what it's allowing us to do is get access to data that's held on a computer. So it's really allowing us to move with the times, with technology. So it used to be that a lot of this information would have been held in books that people would have had and they'd have passed you over, sheets and things. So what that actually allows us to say is, taking that data in whatever form it comes, so that includes the computers. The idea then of if it's not being provided, that is in essence preventing us from doing the inspection that we're trying to complete. And so we don't then have powers to see, so we have no intention to do that. But very often these sorts of conversations are undertaken with farm businesses after an inspection around the kitchen table. It's a conversation of learning and back and forth between farm business and inspector around what has that meant and what are the reasons why. That's what it's allowing us to do, is to get the access to the evidence and to kind of help them get through that inspection, and then that we get them the correct payment at the end as swiftly as possible. So
you don't have that enforcement or seizure powers as such?
No, we don't have those. And we have, and nothing in that element of the regulation has changed at all, so it's exactly the same as it was under the cross-compliance regime.
That's right. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Declan. And William?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your presentation. You're aware of my opinions from the past. I mean, I've seen some of the penalty metrics and the decisions made that penalise farmers very hefty for late permits and things like that were really not a big major issue. And one farmer in particular lost his entire single farm payment 2 or 3 years in a trot for the same issue. Under the new penalty metrics, who makes the final decision? Is it an individual inspector makes the decision?
So the inspector will be there inspecting the elements as set out in the regulations. The point that you're making around those smaller sort of elements that have ended up losing somebody 100% of their payment, that won't happen anymore in this regime, because it is the severity that is now really important in this. So where previously it would have been possible to get to that 100% under repetition, or straight off, so you would be just straight up to that end. If you've done something minor and you've repeated it over and over, that could take you up to 100%. If you've done anything that seemed to be so severe, it could take you straight up to 100%. Now that's not possible. So those minor issues, such as ear tags and things like that, even if they're repeated, you will go through that process of learning, understanding, information. You'll have an opportunity to fix that, and you'll learn from that, and that'll prevent you from getting to that corner, which I think is a great development of this.
No, I welcome that fact. If this committee didn't accept the new metrics, are we currently left with the old metrics, the old penalties system?
At this point, cross-compliance would be the only viable alternative that we would have to deliver.
That's okay, that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions, members?
At this stage?
No. And so we have 25th of November is the date for, unless something happens because by negative resolution, SSR members. Okay, there's no more questions. Got off easy today. You need to eat more scones and stuff before these people come in, members.
Thanks very much for your time.
No,
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Okay, members, we have a decision. We can either put the question to the SR, which I'm content to do.
Yeah.
Members content? Yes. Okay. Okay, members, I'm going to put the question on the SR, unless there's any reason not to. I don't see any reason not to. I think we've investigated this enough. But it's up to you guys. Okay, so I'm going to put the question. That the Committee for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs has considered the SR 2025-165, the Farm Sustainability Standard Regulations, Northern Ireland 2025, and has no objection to the rules subject to the report of the Examiner of Statutory Rules. Okay, are there any objections to the SR being made?
Yep.
No?
We suppose we still have concerns in relation to this, as you know.
So it's do you want to vote on it, or do you want to just register the concerns and?
I think we'll just register our concerns.
Register your concerns.
Yes.
Okay. They'll register concerns in the debate, and okay, we're content that they make the SR.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, members. Thank you. Okay, agenda item 9 is the SR, the Waste Fees and Charges Amendment number 2 Regulations, Northern Ireland 2025. Refer you to page 374 to 381 of the pack for the SL5, the SR and explanatory memorandum. You will recall we were briefed on the SL1 on the 16th of October and heard the Department intends to make this SR under the draft affirmative procedure to bring into effect the annual uplift to the Northern Ireland Environmental Agency waste charging schemes for 25-26. Members will recall the higher than usual annual uplift being applied. The committee agreed that they were content for the Department to make the SR, subject to the SR report, which is still awaited, and the Department has advised there has been no change to the policy content since the SL1 was submitted. Members, as the procedures draft affirmative, there will be a debate in the plenary. Are you content? The committee recommends that the SR, as drafted, is approved by the Assembly. Members content. Thank you. Agenda item 10 is the SR, the Farm Sustainability Payment Scheme Eligibility Regulations. I refer to page 383 to 399 of the pack for the SL5, the SR and explanatory memorandum. Members, as you will recall, we were briefed on the SL1 on the 9th of October and heard that the SR will be made under the draft affirmative procedure to provide the Department with the legal powers to implement the Farm Sustainability Payment, which forms part of the Sustainable Agriculture Programme and will replace the current Farm Sustainability Transition Payment effective from the 1st of January 2026. There have been no changes to policy content since the SL1 was submitted to the committee and the SR in our 48th report. That's at page 430 of the pack and has not drawn the SR to special attention to the Assembly. On the 9th of October, the committee divided on our support for the SR's drafted, and while supportive of the programme, such as the Bovine Genetics Programme, concerns remain regarding the conditionality and penalties, and the capping element was also considered to be a disincentive to progress for larger farms. As you will recall, we had a quorum of 8 and a vote was taken on which we were split ayes 4, noes 4, and consequently the motion to support the SR fell. Have you any further comments? As Chair, we will reflect the views of the committee during the plenary debate on the motion tabled by the Minister, and this is scheduled for the 18th of November.
Yeah, Chair, just in relation, and I know James had followed up with this the other day, in relation to my concerns around just getting clarity or teasing that out around the genotyping and the conditionality. Now, I know Michael, when I came in, had just handed me a note to say that the queries with the Minister at the minute. So, again, could we try to get a push on that?
We could get a push on that. There's another group called SRG you might want to touch base with in regard to that genotyping piece from a stakeholder. If you want, could we do that? Maybe could see if there's a paper that SRG, I can give you the contact details for them in terms of that genotyping piece, which is useful as well. It could be informative, but certainly,
members agreed,
yeah, if members agreed, happy enough with that. Looking for some feedback from SRG in regard to the genotyping. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. You happy enough with that, Anya? I mix you two up.
I was going to say, I'm very happy. That's grand. Anya wants it, I'm happy.
Compliment the both of us. Okay, members. Agenda item 11 is a departmental written briefing update on the DfC-led Shaping Sustainable Places programme, the SSP, in collaboration with DAERA and DFI. I refer you to the briefing paper starting page 401 of the pack, which provides an update on the Shaping Sustainable Places programme. Members, the SSP programme is a collaborative regeneration initiative led by the Department for Communities Urban Regeneration Division, working in partnership with the Department for Infrastructure, the Active Travel Division and DAERA's Rural Affairs Division. It will have capital investment of £150 million over 10 years with a focus on supporting investment and place shaping on village, town and city centres across Northern Ireland, with each department contributing £15 million. DAERA's investment will be directed towards rural settlements of a population of 5,000 or fewer. The public consultation closed on the 21st of September, and a draft for the consultation report is completed by DFC. DAERA officials will provide a further written update to the committee. Officials are developing the outlined business case with a view for approval by spring 2026, and following executive approval, programme delivery will then commence. Are you content to note at this stage and wait for a briefing on the draft consultation report? That would be very useful for us, given our rural credentials. Departmental written briefing then is agenda item 12, the update on the DAERA planning performance. Referred to the tabled papers starting page 22, the briefing paper on the NIEA Natural Environment Division. Also refer you to the current NED planning improvement plan starting page 26, the draft NIEA planning improvement plan starting page 28. Members, the planning target within the NIEA Business Plan 25-26 is to improve statutory planning consultation requests, responses and improve customer services across short, medium and long-term timeframes. To achieve this, the NIEA is developing a 5-strand planning improvement plan. and technical advice and guidance, caseload management, monitoring, reporting on performance process and IT systems, and communication and stakeholder engagement. Specific proposed actions within each of these work strands are provided in the draft planning improvement plan from NIN. Within that is the NED planning improvement plan, which contains 22 targeted actions to improve planning performance by 15 percentage points where there has been a persistent backlog, and to reduce the number of consultations submitted whilst improving the quality of those received. Members, in terms of the current overall planning position, NIE state that the ongoing resourcing issues have contributed to the backlog, and a further tranche of new scientific competitions will be launched by the Department of Finance in the coming weeks. The planning improvement plan will also aim to reduce the volumes of consultations received. Some key points. The backlog is currently 353 consultations, 32 of which relate to agricultural proposals. In 2024, NIEA and the Marine Fisheries Division received 4,461 statutory planning consultations, and 67% of these, which was 2,977, were responded to within the statutory time frame. In 2025 to date, 2,115 statutory planning consultations have been received, so that's a big downturn by the look of it, with 64% responded to within the time frame, compared to the same date last year due to resource issues, which looks actually like a bit of a fall, even though there's been a reduction in applications, which is concerning. Yeah, I know this is a bugbear of yours. The complexity of consultations is also a factor, as the proposed siting is often in the most protected sites across Northern Ireland. However, the average number of days taken to respond decreased from 29 days in 24-25 to 25 days. So for those who did get a response within that time frame, it was shorter, so there's some wins. The Department advises measures taken to date to improve the quality of consultations have included a planning workshop that highlighted the need for an improvement in the quality of information being submitted to DAERA. Council is instructed to provide clear specific reasons for consultations to ensure that advice provided by NIEA is appropriately targeted, and encouragement of early engagement in the pre-application discussion for major and regionally significant proposals. The Department now needs to finalise and implement the draft NIEA planning improvement plan and implement the NED planning improvement plan. Okay. A lot of plans in there, a lot of P's. Okay, is there any questions or queries in regard to that one? Interestingly, in the debate this week, the Minister was in a response to the new environmental agency, and I had talked in around some of the, particularly in around the ammonia plan and stuff, and that he sees this new agency as being turbocharging, I suppose, that aspect, if it's possible to deliver that. But obviously we're in the here and now, and this is the plan for the planning applications as of now and going forward. So William, you're first, and then Aoife.
It's all very well to show statistics, but planners tell me they're getting consultation responses asking them to identify issues that are NAA's remit to identify, and planners are not identifying them because it's not their consultation. It's not their place to identify the NAA issues. It's up to NAA to identify them. But by doing that, it's making their consultation times look better than they are. And that's the feeling of some planners.
That's a very interesting angle, actually. If I could understand if NIA were seeking more information on a specific issue, but if they're not identifying the issue, then it's very hard to provide the information.
Well, it's not planners' position. It's not their remit to identify NIAs, what NIA needs to respond on.
So it's an application. So what you're saying is the planners would have no problem providing information if they knew what was being sought.
Yeah. Planners consult on an application, but in some instances NAs come back and saying, what area of this application do you want us to respond to? But it's up to NA to look at the application and see where they need to respond to. It's not up to planners.
Whether it meets with the planning policy or not?
Well, planners it's not they're not the experts on that. They're experts in planning, not on NAA's remit.
I haven't dealt with anything like that. I understand what your issues, but I've come across.
It's a recent thing.
It's a recent one. Okay. In terms of maybe tackling that question, William, could you maybe give us? We're obviously not going to do constituency work in the committee, but just to make sure we get the right response to the question, could you?
An email to you?
Yes, if you don't mind, just with a wee bit more detail on that, because I understand it, and if that's what's coming back to planners, that's not satisfactory.
Well, it would be skewing those consultation responses. You understand?
Yeah. No, I think I do. If you could share that with us, it'll help paint that picture a bit. Just
Right,
so we get a qualitative answer, if you like.
So
Is that okay? Is that okay? So we're waiting on that. Aoife?
Yeah, so it says in the report there, approximately 353 consultations currently in the backlog, 32 relate to agriculture proposals. So I think that the department should provide a breakdown of the remaining consultations by sector or proposal type. So I do think we should ask that question. But I just think it's interesting in terms of NIEA. I have had several, more than I would like to say, coming in from constituents. One very recently, NIEA have to do a bat survey. And I have said it's 29 months later and she still has no bat survey done. Like, where is the delays coming there? That's not good enough if you ask me. And it is, people have plans in place, people, obviously it has a huge hold up on the planning, with the planning in through council. So I'd love a couple of questions to be asked around that. What is the problem with, if it's a bat survey we need to ask specifically, or is it NIEA? Where is the difficulties coming from, and how can we resolve that, or how can the department resolve that?
And a further breakdown of the other, so the 353
yes, please,
in terms of how that.
Yeah.
Because I think you're right in terms of 32 relate to agriculture proposals, but within that, the rest of that, with 321 or whatever, could still be very much in the rural aspect of may not be directly agriculture, but could be because they're in an area of specific
natural
interest.
constraint, I get
constraint
that.
Or something, yeah.
Yeah, but I think in terms of needing a bat survey, that is something that needs to be done. Yeah, and that comes more than, and I mean, you mentioned, or you were reading it there, that the complexity, that the turnaround 29 days, sometimes 25 days, that couldn't be any further from the truth. So yeah, no, I think those questions would be good to get answered.
John and then William's going to come in.
Yeah, I want to make 2 points, Chair. First of all, that the percentage of those that are agriculture related is less than 10%. You made a valid point, or there may be others that are rural location related, and of course there may, but also those may be applications. No one's here trying to determine an outcome, and I'm not suggesting that, but I can think of a few that are in a rural location, and I can understand full well why there might be environmental surveys being done, because there's significant local opposition or significant local concern. So there may be, in many cases, valid reasons for prolonged and detailed scrutiny of what's going on there. The second point is, I think we have to acknowledge that there are a huge number of applications and consultation requests, and a definitive number of civil servants and public servants there to respond to them. And it might be good to know whether that number has gone up or down in recent years, and whether the workload has increased or decreased as well.
Yeah. I think there evidently are issues and concerns. I think, and I do accept what you said, that in terms of those rural aspects, there may be contentious issues. I think the point that William was raising was sometimes maybe the applicant doesn't know what's being sought. You know, it's bottoming out, and I think it goes back to Aoife's point too. This has been brought forward, but what actually is it you want? And I think they could be more specific. Now, this isn't just the NIEA. I see this with planners as well. Sometimes the pre-application discussions can be beefed out better, perhaps even with the NIEA in regard to that. What is it you need? It can either be provided or not. To me, it's planning slightly. It should be more black and white. This is what you're required to do. This is what you need to meet, or if this, yes or no, and then. That's part of your evidence comes forward.
I want to stress, I'm not suggesting for a moment that anybody here is asking for a fast tracking process, or anyone's trying to determine an outcome, but we need to be absolutely clear there will be applications in there on which there are major local concerns and interest, and that is why some of them are taking time. I can think of quite a number. I could list, it would be inappropriate to do so, but I can think of quite a number in my own constituency.
Well, okay, thank you, John. Yes, happy enough. And William, did you want to come in with a little one at the end?
Just, if you mentioned about survey, you know, I have one situation where a guy's waiting. The planners, got about survey done back in May and June. It was forwarded to NIA, and months later they still haven't responded to that. The bat survey is a very minor issue in relation to NIA. I can understand John's right. There's some major issues that will take time, but the bat survey is a 10-minute job. Like it's not. It's already done for them. They've just examined it.
Yes, the evidence is submitted, and therefore
Yeah.
you can react to it. Yeah, I agree. Okay, members. So we've plenty of comments there. Are you content with your queries and questions? Okay, we'll follow up on. Thank you, members. Okay, we're running out of time now, members. Don't want to rush anything, but just to be aware. Departmental written briefing on the update and Lough Neagh action plan. I refer you to the briefing paper starting at page 406 of the pack, providing a summary of the progress and implementation of a Lough Neagh report and action plan. A summary table of actions and current status can be found starting at page 412. Members will recall that we previously had an oral briefing from officials on the progress of the action plan at our meeting on the 6th of March, which is incredible. I think it was many months ago. The action plan includes 37 actions, with the majority of these attributed to DAERA, and to date 14 actions have been delivered, 22 are progressing, and 1 remains dependent on another action being taken forward. The paper provides an update on actions delivered to date, including water quality monitoring outreach events, sustainable utilisation of livestock slurry, SBRI projects, Lough Neagh Science Platform and the Lough Neagh Environmental Farming Scheme, a group project. The committee previously raised concerns regarding staffing levels, and I note that DAERA has increased staffing focus on monitoring compliance and enforcement within Lough Neagh catchment, and out of 28 new posts created, 24 have now been filled. In relation to progress in actions, updates provided include details of AFBI research and development proposals commissioned, the water quality communication strategy, development of conservation management plan, and a scientific review of the environmental impact of sand extraction at Lough Neagh. In regards to stakeholder engagement, Minister Muir has chaired 4 quarterly Lough Neagh stakeholder forums, with the next scheduled for December of this year. Members, have you any comments, or are members content to receive periodic updates via written briefing, or do we wish to have a further oral briefing to question officials on specific concerns? I would like to keep this on our radar, and I mean, March was the last time we had that oral briefing, members, so would you be content if we seek a further oral briefing on regards to this, make sure that it's firmly on our... Is that okay?
Chair, can I just suggest that is if that's okay, if it's in the new year, following the last, which will be the December report.
Early in the new year,
Makes sense that it's early in the new year. We're also getting quite congested for...
I thought the report was very good from reading it, and I am happy that an oral briefing will be given, because I do think we need to keep this a top priority. But I would like an answer in terms of, look, we have, and rightly so, put emphasis on agriculture, on infrastructure and so on, but I would like to know how much emphasis has been put on public ownership. Has the department or minister, like, what has he done in that sense? And certainly, you know, I from reading that, because obviously it's not in community ownership, and you know, who in the community would look after it in the event of it coming into community ownership. But there's also infrastructure that could be put in place to clean up the loch in the short term. And I think that I would like to know what the answer to that is, if you're happy to ask that question.
Bilateral in the oral briefing.
By letter, I think, because it's go for letter in terms that there might be some updates on some of the steps that have been taken. So there's a number of projects live. Some of them are in that sort of infrastructure piece about cleaning up. An update on that, I suppose, in terms of those projects would be useful. I've tried to seek that verbally at times, and I get mixed up in there's that many projects sort of live at the moment. And then the public ownership piece is obviously a wider debate. That different approaches have been made at times, and the complexity of that, of what it would look like, even if it was achievable, I think are mind-boggling. But it's certainly a reasonable request.
I suppose and I appreciate that. I suppose that there is a lot of complexities around it. I suppose it's for my own information as well, and then for us to go and have a discussion about it. But what are the complexities? You know, 40% of our drinking water comes from Lough Neagh. Community ownership is vital at this stage, and we need serious discussions around community ownership and when that is going to happen and how that's going to happen. And I think clarity is absolutely needed. And emphasis is need to be put there as well. If we're going to put the emphasis everywhere else, it certainly needs to be put here too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, can I just clarify? Apologies on that. Just that is this work undertaken by the action plan to consider public ownership, or is this more widely in the Parliament? Or are you not?
Suppose it's a wider.
It's a wider
it is
piece.
a wider issue. I do understand
if it's
that.
outside the blue-green algae, I mean, so they use blue-green algae, and then the ownership is a wider. Is it?
No, that's granted.
John, you have a lot of background in water. You have a lot of background in water. You're a resident.
I was going to say these are
expert.
separate. These are separate issues, or the ownership and the action on pollution. And I've no issue with trying to find out the information. However, I think it's important to acknowledge that if there was public ownership or community ownership declared tomorrow, it wouldn't take away from the fact that a significant public body is also polluting the loch through our wastewater infrastructure, and the Minister has repeatedly appealed for help around the Swarpy issue, for example. So it may be good to try and broaden our scope in terms of information we want to receive, although DAERA, if they present on this, will be able to point us in the right direction. But I think we do have to acknowledge there are significant publicly owned issues currently anyway.
Yeah, the other bit that, I mean, we'll get into this in a while bit, is, I touched on it the other day, is, and I should declare an interest, and I will, as a septic tank user. In regard to that, there's a massive, you talk about public ownership, there's a big part of this is that public, it's not just public ownership, it's public responsibility too. I think
checking
so.
Of those.
Yeah, the check, and how, what we do, our habits even, in terms of what, you know, I mean, there's a whole piece that's missing from that space. So there is too. Okay, members content?
Yep.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you so much, guys. Correspondence, given the size of the pack, I propose to deal with correspondence by exception. There's a correspondence memo for reference at page 416 of the pack, and massive members are content to note the correspondence as presented. And if members have any comments, I'll summarise the content of the particular correspondence and open it for comment unless we content to note it. Yep.
Yep, Chair, can I ask in relation to the one about antibiotic resistance on will some information not be linked to the agreement we made earlier in the meeting to try and get information around the pig farm space?
So yeah, there is. So that obviously is in relation to something we talked about earlier with regard to the data breach, and that. So yeah, that's something that's going to be inextricably tied together. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
Yep. Okay, members. Okay, members, I refer you to page 418 of the pack to correspondence from the Department dated the 20th of October regarding the publication of the UK ETS Authority Consultation UK Emissions Trading Scheme Aviation Regional Connectivity, which will look at the potential impact of removal of free allocation from the aviation sector with particular regard to communities in isolated areas with a few other viable means of transport. A copy of the consultation document can be found at page 34 of table papers. Any comments you content to note?
Done.
Okay, members, I refer you to page 428 of the pack for the correspondence from the Department dated 27th of October regarding the first formal meeting of the NAP Stakeholder Task and Finish Group held on the 22nd of October, where all parties reviewed and reached agreement on the terms of reference for the group to be published on the DAERA website. Any comments you can tend to note?
Chair, can I just interrupt? Excuse me.
Yes.
Just to say that I think members have agreed on these are items.
Oh, that's part of it. Okay. Excellent. Okay,
Members have
right.
agreed that to note.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, to follow through on that. Anywho, right, where are we up to? So, correspondence. That's all in that, isn't it then?
Takes us through to item 15. Is the next
Yeah,
item.
okay. Okay, well done. Item 15 then is the forward work plan. Members, we have a planning session which will potentially be updating the forward work plan after that, so staff will circulate a version by email once any thoughts have been considered then regarding the formal work plan, so we'll consider that when we've done our next session. So any other business? At this stage I'd like to remind you that the NAP session next Thursday, following the meeting in the Stormont Hotel, clearly given the importance of the issues, members' attendance is crucial, and staff will provide more details by email regarding times and structure. We have currently 30 attendees confirmed. There's a balance right in the middle, which is really good. So I also note that on Monday's opposition day order paper, there's a motion on establishing an independent environmental protection agency, but obviously part of that debate started this week when the Minister made the announcement. So does anyone have any other business at this point?
Nope.
Nope. Thank you, members. Okay. Agenda item 17 is the date, time and place of next meeting. The next committee meeting will be on Thursday, 13th of November at 10 a.m. in room 21. Okay. Thank you. Meeting is now adjourned.
Oh my God, I have a pen here.